turned left, went through, and turned right. And using that, you can calculate the ins and outs of each intersection.
And that was in April of 19?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Do have one
Commissioner Craig?
question, Commissioner Craig. Quick question on the acceptable delay index thresholds. These are determined by CCTA?
So for calculating impacts, you have what is acceptable and what is unacceptable. You have a threshold of how much an unacceptable value can go up before it's considered significant.
Okay.
So the acceptable levels are set in the Lamarinda Action Plan,
Okay.
and the threshold is not, there's not an adopted threshold of significance anywhere, so we use the same threshold that was used in 2012 so that we could compare apples to apples
Okay.
on that one.
So for instance, that the acceptable delay threshold on SR 24 increases in 2030, that comes from
Yep.
the La Marinda Action
Yes.
Plan?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner DeGiorgio?
On a related note, in the study on page 44, there's a table 5, and I was hoping you could help me understand the projected, 2019 projected column. If you look at the PM, northbound PM decreases from the 2017 observed, and then on southbound, it decreases from 2.4 to 1.34 on the AM. And so it just got me curious, if you can help me understand what the projection number means in terms of, it's unintuitive to me that delay index would decrease by that level, but can you help me understand that?
Yeah, so that goes back to whether we were basing the projections on 2013 or 2017 observed data, and we weren't confident in the accuracy of the 2017 monitoring reports. So the 2017 monitoring results are the 2017 observed. The 2019 projected are based on how much growth we would expect from the 2013 values.
Okay.
So the 2017 values are there for reference, but the projections are not based on them.
Okay, thank you.
And that's described in a bit more detail in the text above the table.
Mhm.
So I can explain further if you like.
No, that's fine, thank you.
Does the Transportation and Circulation Commission have any more questions? I can come back to you, but I'm going to bring it to the
Yeah,
Planning
go-
Commission.
go ahead. Come back later.
If something occurs to you. Okay, do we have any questions on the Planning Commission for TJKM or staff?
Yeah,
Commissioner Heising?
I have questions, yeah. So related to the La Marinda Action Plan, did TJKM or staff approach CCTA or SWAT regarding amending the plan or discussing definition of trap lane versus through lane? Is it a, I guess,
So we approached CCTA pretty early on that point, and we discussed it extensively with CCTA staff and with city staff on whether a trap lane counts as a through lane or not. The determination ultimately was if it starts north of the intersection and it's not just intersection to intersection, then it's going to count as a through lane, and therefore it's going to conflict.
so in,
We discussed this extensively.
and there was no other interpretation of the definition of that trap lane? Because so I actually went through the document on the CCTA website, and on page 57 of that document, it defines what you said up on the slide, that no through lanes would be allowed. And it also further defines that corridor is 2 through lanes with additional turn lanes at most intersections, and then further on
Greg, can you
on
put
page
the plan?
92 of the study itself, it talked about gateway constraints being the signal timing at the various signals and at strategic entry points. And it talked about the north end of the corridor being the limiting, because if you limit the corridor, up at the north end, adding additional trap lane at the south end just to facilitate traffic onto the freeway doesn't really affect the north end of the corridor. So you're still limiting what's coming into the corridor. So I was wondering if any of those arguments were made to make
Yes.
it easier for CCTA to agree that it's not an added lane. It's,
So we went around at length on that particular point on whether it counted as adding a through lane or adding capacity. In 2016, the corridor was retimed with signal coordination to intentionally meter the traffic.
correct.
So Deer Hill is no longer the single choke point.
It's north of there.
It's north of there is where traffic is metered intentionally. But the determination in talking with CCTA staff and city staff and our reading of everything was that since the lane would begin north of the intersection and then continue south as opposed to just showing up at the intersection, that's long enough to count as a through lane as opposed to just the equivalent of adding a turn lane.
Could it be interpreted that the portion of lane north of Deer Hill intersection is simply a right turn pocket? And likewise, the section between Deer Hill and 24 is one giant right turn pocket onto the freeway on-ramp? Because by definition in the Long Range Action Plan, it defines right turn pockets as not being counted as additional lanes.
So a turn pocket generally doesn't extend through upstream intersections. So no, not really. It wouldn't.
Or could they be two adjacent turn pockets?
Hi, this is Chris Kinsel with TJKM. That's not a super well-defined issue, obviously. I think in this case, the lane begins at north of Deer Hill, and in addition, as a part of the project, the informal right turn lane at Deer Hill is being formalized. It's now a wide bike lane as a part of the project, and in addition to that, the trap lane would add, and so it would be in effect a fourth lane, not to mention, well, the fifth lane, including the left turn lane in a southbound direction. So I think it's a point that could be argued, and that's the reason why in TJCAM's recommendations we suggested that that point be explored further. That's something that could be subject to city policy, we believe, as well as the La Miranda group as a whole. So it's a valid point, I think, we took, I think, the more conservative approach on that.
Okay, thank you. Speaking of more conservative, just so I understand, the ITE trip generation rates for the 8th edition, you used apartments were used, and then in the, what edition is now the 10th edition that is being
Yes.
used? And
Yeah,
it's not
it's-
apartments, it's
Multifamily housing,
multifamily,
mid-rise.
low-rise or something
Low-rise,
like
yeah.
that. So the more conservative number is the prior number from the apartments
Correct.
in the 8th edition, and that's being used in all the analysis? Okay.
Correct.
You want to keep going, or?
Sure.
Okay.
And to the point of the trip generation, the reason it's not listed as the same land use is that the 10th edition reorganized the various residential uses a little bit to better reflect newer data.
Okay.
So,
Actually, can I interject one question that's related to the trap lane? Could you speak to the configuration of the bicycle lane and where it's crossing the trap lane?
yes. It's hard to
And
see
why?
it's hard to see on this slide, but I believe the annotated site plan is one of your figures.
Mhm.
Greg, can you zoom in at all?
Good try. You want to start this one?
There we go. Thank you. That works. Thank you. So under the proposed configuration, the new southbound lane is the aqua right here. The green is the bicycle lane, and the dark blue is the new right turn lane. Currently, the right turn lane and the bike lane, as Chris said, it's a widened bike lane that acts as a turn lane but isn't officially a turn lane. This would separate those two flows. So under the proposed project plan, they would have the bike lane continue, and then it would cross the trap lane right about here, so that it was not crossing either at the intersection or right at the point of the ramp. And by having those lanes cross there, it's minimizing the amount of weaving and the amount of effect from the nearby intersections.
So, sorry, it's minimizing the,
It's minimizing having cars turn and bikes trying to cross the traffic stream at the same time. So,
it seems like it is doing that because cars are,
in this design, it has it crossing farther away from this intersection and farther away from the ramp.
So
So
it's crossing a driveway too?
I think the exact location of this transition is, Greg, correct me if I'm wrong, that can be adjusted if the specific location of that crossover can be adjusted if necessary. Yeah.
Yes, and the applicant can speak to it. As one approaches southbound on a bicycle, once you've gone through the intersection at Deer Hill Stanley, you're now looking at the intersection as the driveway comes. And so if you have made eye contact or understood whether someone is pulling out in front of you, once you have started to cross that driveway, that is when you can move. But if the recommendation from the commissions is to move that to the south, that I think that can easily be accommodated.
okay, I was just curious what the reasoning was, and I didn't know if there were some sort of rules that you're using, putting in place to determine, where, how far from an intersection, or the speed of traffic when the bike lane's crossing. I was sort of thinking, I can see the benefit to crossing where it's shown, or maybe further down, so that you're not sandwiched in between two lanes of traffic, but I was curious as to what the reasoning was.
The exact location will probably be determined in the field based on conditions, but typically the bike lane, when you approach an intersection, the bike lane at some point needs to get to the left of the right turn lane, which it does in this case at Deer Hill. And then now, because it's the trap lane becomes the right turn lane, it needs to move over, obviously, before it gets to the on-ramp itself. So I think probably the area of that it could go in would be anywhere from the driveway, I would say, to the north, so that you get in the position where you're, again, to the left of the right turn lane, in this case, the trap lane, as quickly as possible. When bikes have to cross cars, it's always a conflict that needs to be worked out based on the conditions in the field.
And so if the bicycle was to move over further to the north, then they would potentially already be on the outside of a lane that a bus is coming down before they move into the bus stop pocket.
Well, right, that's a drop-off area for buses and for school kids. And the buses would use that lane, yes. So they would be between the lane where the buses are and the trap lane.
Okay, thank you. I'll pass it back to you, Commissioner Heising.
Yes, so real quick, back to the long-range action plan. If staff or TJKM approach CCTA or go to the SWAT committee and are unsuccessful in in convincing them and the project variant has to be built, what are the this is maybe more for staff, what are the ramifications to not following the La Miranda action plan? If, is there funding tied to that if we didn't
So-
abide by that?
So potentially, it would be tied to Measure J funds. So in the process, I mean, they mentioned that we talked to CCTA about this, including the definition. The La Miranda Action Plan does, specifically say, including short segments. So we had the back and forth. Is this a through lane? Is it 2 right turn lanes? Is it really what would control flow into this corridor, or is that really, upstream? And would the way it's worded actually penalize Lafayette to help our situation around schools and the BART station in the morning? So we don't know the complete ramifications of that, but potentially it could be tied to Measure J funding sources, which the city currently receives about $560,000 a year from that as return to source that we use for street projects. But really CCTA's direction was start with your La Miranda group, and then SWAT, so LPMC, and then SWAT, and then CCTA, and potentially even other transportation agencies surrounding, so that you'd have kind of a start small and work big, because really it starts with would Lafayette even want this tied to this project? Then it's would it impact negatively Moraga and Orinda? Would they be okay with it and see some of the same arguments that we're seeing about, 2 right turn lanes, and we could continue to meter upstream. But then it would go to SWAT, which includes unincorporated like Alamo and Danville and San Ramon, along with La Miranda. Same thing for kind of their buy-in and discussion. And then we believe finally CCTA. And if it went through that procedure, potentially there could be an amendment. There isn't a precedent for an amendment for this plan, but that seems like the situation that we've laid out before us.
Okay, thank you.
My apologies, sorry. Mike Moran, City Engineer and Public Works Director for City of Lafayette.
Thank you.
Another question related to the Caltrans letter, I believe. I believe Caltrans wanted to look at any analysis on that would impact the ramps at SR 24. And from my understanding, that'll be part of the encroachment permit process, but was there any plan for the traffic study to address effects on the on-ramps or off-ramps of 24?
Yeah, please.
Caltrans was approached to see if they had any objection to the trap lane. I'm not sure that's your question or not, and they did not. They had no objection to the
So they
trap
just
lane.
looked at the trap lane. They didn't look at the traffic analysis as a whole to see how there might be any operational effects of on the interchange, either the ramps or the main line?
Actually, I'm not sure what they did, but they didn't seem to have any concern with that at all.
Okay.
So, sorry, can I just
Sure,
follow up on
Commissioner
that?
Prezant.
Yeah, just follow up on that. So they didn't look at it, and you assume they didn't have concerns? I'm sorry, I'm just trying to get that right. So did they look at it, or did they not look at it?
They did look at it. There was a concern on the part of the team doing the environmental studies that would be acceptable or not to Caltrans. So Caltrans was asked, and they did look at it, and they said they were okay with it,
You're talking about the trap lane?
the trap lane.
Okay, setting aside the trap lane, did anybody actually look at potential backup onto Highway 24 during peak hours?
We looked at the intersection, and we did observe conditions in the field.
Yeah, but there wasn't, I don't think there were any traffic backups onto the ramp specifically related to the project.
I think,
So,
yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Spot.
Go ahead.
So I'm just trying to get an understanding of it. And trust me, I read the report. It's a lot of fun. But I'm trying to understand. There are times, at least, I'm just saying my observations. There is backup onto Highway 24 on people trying to turn to go north during peak hours, like during the afternoon. Did anybody actually look at that to see if this project would affect that backup onto Highway 24 during peak hours? Do you understand what I'm asking?
Yes, I think that was the purpose of the delay index, to see how the volumes on the freeway would change over time with and without the project. So yes, it was looked at, and that was sort of taken into account through the delay index analysis.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, just to follow up, what section of the report discusses that?
I'm not sure it's discussed in the report. I'm just giving my response to the question.
Okay, I just was hoping to read it in the report.
I don't think it's,
I think if you look at 9.6.1, there's one paragraph on Caltrans that I found, and I'm digitally searching through the file, and it only talks about the trap lane, so, which was one of my questions, because I've seen that every day I come home from work, and it's not backed up every day, but as I've mentioned before, I have to go through the intersection and go left on Pleasant Hill, and there's quite a lot of backup on the northbound all the way up, and it has come all the way up to 24. And
is it
I,
AM condition or PM condition?
this is a PM
PM.
condition.
PM.
And I'm completely surprised that Caltrans, maybe they didn't know that they should have been asked, because it clearly says they were asked about the trap lane, and they answered, apparently. But I guess I'm just shocked and surprised they weren't asked about this, and I would ask that they do be asked about this, because it's had me worried many a times, because sometimes people get in that right lane and they get frustrated, and it's at 2 miles an hour, and the lane that's then going to go across and loop to southbound is decelerating from freeway speeds to, making that big, 3/4 loop, which is what I do every day. And so people jut out, from 2 miles an hour to someone going, whatever, between 50 and 30. And the farther back it gets, the more that's, to me, extremely dangerous. And I'm not the only one who experiences that. I just personally have seen it a lot. So is there a way that that could be specifically asked of Caltrans? Because I would only imagine that additional development, it's not going to make that less.
That's no problem to ask Caltrans.
Okay. I think we're doing ourselves a disservice if we don't.
Excuse me, Chair. May we ask,
Mr. DeGiorgio?
yeah, may we ask some follow-up questions on the trap lane issues?
Sure.
Wanna go?
Thank you. I have a few. Yes, but with regard to the trap lane, I don't understand why it's called that, but I accept it anyway. Something puzzled me in the report, and I read it all too, and probably all 500 letters from the public. I think my stack was about that high. With regard to the lane leading to the freeway, the report stated that nearly 2 vehicle lengths would be reduced by adding that lane. I actually happen to like that lane.
Can you tell me what page you're looking at, please?
That was page 55. And it said precisely that. The optional southbound right turn queue would be reduced by nearly 2 vehicle lengths under the proposed project. How is it that a whole other lane and then all that footage back in the block before is only going to reduce a queue by 2 cars? That doesn't make sense to me.
So the
I believe the queue that's being reduced is the one at Deer Hill, not at the on-ramp itself.
Oh, that was not clear on page 55. Thank you. Yes, somebody might have a look at that. Another question, when you were counting trips, you used the 6 per unit, is that right, per multifamily unit?
The trip
You didn't use the, what was it, 4.5? That you used the 6 from,
They use the conservative number.
Yeah.
that would have been 6, yeah. Did you count service trips in that, in estimating the trips done? For example, postman, garbage, Amazon, daycare, gardening, cleaning, babysitting, elder care,
Yes.
maintenance folk, pool care, administrative, how were those factored in? Can you tell me? Nice
yes.
to see you, Chris. I haven't seen you for years.
So the trip generation data counts all trips. So it counts commute trips, non-commute trips, service trips, and it doesn't care whether it's a resident making the trip or not. It's counting all vehicles in and all vehicles out.
So you're just assuming that every unit draws, is allowed 6?
So this is an aggregate of, I think there are several dozen traffic studies or trip generation studies that go into this particular land use rates. And these are the standard reference that are used for planning studies. And it's on average, a multifamily unit would generate 6.45 trips per unit per day.
Okay. And is this project, is this who controls the roads? Is the unit, the development going to maintain their roads, or will this be a city development and the city will maintain the unit?
I'm sorry, I can't quite hear you.
Oh, sorry. Will the city be maintaining these roads, or will the development, the project itself, be maintaining them through a homeowners association or something like? Is it public or private?
Private.
It's private, okay. Then I might suggest you're going to have a problem. You see, as Deer Hill comes down from the west, from the west heading east, and you've got an entry at the top, you've got an entry close to the bottom. All of those roads converge on Pleasant Hill Road. You have people coming from BART. There's only one turning lane as people head home from BART. People who have previously maybe taken Huff or Moraga Road or who knows what home from BART will suddenly be taking this way. It's going to attract because they're going to cut through this project. You see how they funnel out and they can make an easy turn on Pleasant Hill Road going through the project. May I suggest that you add gates? At least one gate, but probably 2. There's only one turning lane to turn right. And suddenly all that traffic is going to find their way through that project. It's happening at the project at the intersection of Pleasant Hill Road and Mount Diablo Boulevard as people are cutting through that one just because they can't stand to wait for the Pleasant Hill Road light to make a right turn heading for Burton Valley or Walnut Creek or wherever they're going. This is a natural. I think you might want to think about gates.
Commissioner DeGiorgio?
I'd like to follow up on a comment on page 92, the last paragraph. Regarding trap lanes, if I get the gist right, basically, the trap lane is to mitigate the impact of the development. But it says, the report says that by adding more southbound capacity, it has the potential of increasing speeds upstream and attract more drivers into the corridor. And I thought that the lights upstream were actually kind of metering the traffic, so kind of the Waze effect. Is that the case that if you have this trap lane, it's going to increase the flow throughout all of Pleasant Hill Road, or is it just going to be for the intersection?
It's primarily going to affect the intersection. It should not back up because the constraint is at the north end. And that's a meter that's there pretty much all the time. And that restricts the flow of traffic at that point. So the effect of the additional lanes near Deer Hill is primarily to assist traffic at that Deer Hill intersection between there and the freeway.
Thanks.
Commissioner Herdane?
Yes. One here. Even though the project is going to be private, because there are so many high schoolers being dropped off and collected in the front of this project, if this development is public, which it isn't, and not gated, but they may want to do that, who knows? The parents will likely enjoy having the roads through it and close to the arterials to park in, waiting for their children. And the question is also, would these roads not be used for this purpose and also for Akalani's overflow parking when, say, there were swim meets and such as that take place on the school grounds? And it seems like a natural, that this would be a good parking place just within the gates to move in and places to park, yeah. Is that?
That's a possibility. That would be the control of the HOA and the private parties that live there and regulate it.
And the shuttle also, is that totally, is it a free shuttle? Is it only partially subsidized? And how many trips would it be making to BART?
I don't know that the schedule details are worked out. That'll be something as the conditions of approval are refined, that can be defined at that point. And as to the whether it's fully or partially subsidized, I think perhaps the developer can respond to that.
Commissioner Taylor?
I have a question with respect to the anomalous increases in the delay index that we were discussing previously between 2013 and 2017. Did TGKM or the others that were analyzing these numbers take into account that during these specific years there was a huge growth and proliferation of Waze and other similar mobile navigation apps that were in use by drivers that could thereby account for a huge spike in the volume of drivers coming over to local roads versus being on the freeways?
We didn't address the specific reasons why numbers may have changed. That's an ongoing question in traffic engineering in general. It's not something that we can really investigate as part of like a single project study, the impact of outside factors. It's an ongoing concern in traffic engineering of the impact of those, but no, we don't specifically have anything taken into account for this project.
Okay, and I had a second point related to the bike lane that we were discussing previously, and the fact that it's essentially laid out for there to be the trap lane, the bike lane, and then the other southbound lanes on Pleasant Hill. So in fact, at the point at which you get to cars driving onto the on-ramp for 24, in fact, the bike lane is then needing to cross over 2 lanes of vehicular traffic that are both gunning to go up onto the 24 at that juncture. Is that correct?
No, the trap lane would be the only lane going onto the freeway. So before you get to the ramp, the bikes would already be to the left of the turning traffic.
So all other southbound Pleasant Hill traffic that is going on to the freeway would then be moving over to that lane?
So the bike lane would be to the right of the trap lane up here.
Right.
And it would cross the trap lane and it would be on the left side.
Right.
So from the crossover on south, the traffic turning onto Highway 24 would already be to the right of the cyclists. with the trap lane.
I was just thinking, might you be talking about when you go under the freeway and then you go on the westbound, you'll have to go over it again? That would be a second time, but
Right.
I believe, right? I
Um,
mean,
you go to the
maybe
next
that's
slide,
beyond
please.
this.
You're saying when you cross under the freeway?
When you go, yeah, when you go under, because once you get to the, underneath the freeway, you're all the way on the right.
And zoom in
Once
here.
you get the, because this is that same off-ramp I take every day, then that's going to be another, we're not showing it, but
So just to be clear on what you're talking about having to cross this on-ramp and then also crossing the traffic coming off of this off-ramp? Okay. Currently, I don't think there is a bike lane going that far south. And bikes already are conflicting with all of the other ramps. It would improve, the bike lane and trap lane would improve conditions at this ramp, but it doesn't touch on the others.
So then what happens once you pass the ramp? So you're safe going past the project, and then what?
Then it's just like it is now.
Yeah, no change. No change from existing.
Madam Chairman? If you can figure out a way how to get those bike lanes under that freeway underpass, they will pick up bike lanes on the other side, on the south side, and then that all leads to the Lafayette-Moraga Trail, which would take the kids to Stanley.
Commissioner Brown?
I have a related question around the trap lane. Section 6.8.1 of the report talks about pedestrian impacts. And the project has a multi-use path, which is obviously a good idea. But then in the section of the report, it says that the multi-use path then crosses SR 24 at the crosswalk there. And, that's a highway on-ramp with cars accelerating to go on. That seems like a pretty dangerous spot. There is a crosswalk there now, but there's no path or other, pedestrian traffic there. But the report concludes that there's a less than significant impact. I wondered if you all thought about that or looked at that.
So I believe there's currently a crosswalk here. And
There is, but there's no real path or significant pedestrian traffic there.
so currently there's no sidewalk along here at all. So we would be adding facilities along here, and I think there is a sidewalk to the south. So it would be a controlled crossing, or a marked crossing. They should have.
Commissioner Craig?
Hi, back to the BART shuttle. Is it assumed that that's only going to be available for residents of the project, or could that be made available to a broader group of people who might benefit in the area?
For the purposes of mitigation, it would need to be available to the residents, but it would be up to the HOA whether they wanted anyone else to be able to use it.
And it says just from the project site, so it wouldn't perhaps stop the new pickup area on Pleasant Hill Road? Or would that just be open for later discussion?
I think that would be open for later discussion.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Do we have any other questions from the Traffic and Circulation Commission?
I have more of a general question I can come back to later, but Greg, if you wouldn't mind going back to the zoom in on the trap lane that you had before. And actually, at the bottom, I want to look at the intersection with Deer Hill Road and Stanley. I know that's not been part of the plan of the project, but I'm curious to know why there's not crosswalks being incorporated into the design for the north side of Stanley to Deer Hill Road. And I know that there's no pathway currently that goes to the north to Spring Hill, but it seems to me, and I don't know how that would affect, but there's two questions. One for you, how would that affect the calculations of the traffic flows if there was such a crosswalk there? And then we'll later have to ask the applicant why they didn't consider including one. But do you have any comments on how a northbound, a north crosswalk would affect traffic flows?
right now, because of the absence of any walkways, even room to walk, I think, let alone pavement along Deer Hill to the west or Pleasant Hill to the north, I think there's a feeling not to encourage pedestrians to be there. And what I observed in the morning peak hour, occasionally somebody would, parents drop their kids off all over near that school. And one of the spots is right there. And I was also surprised that those that were dropped off there actually crossed the intersection using all 3 other crosswalks rather than taking the shortcut. I was amazed at that, but that's at least a couple of them did that, but it's not widely done. Most parents would probably not want to drop their kids off there. If they're not making a right turn, they'll probably drop them off at the far side where there's a passenger loading zone there now, a marked white curb. So I think the absence of provisions for pedestrians in that area is the reason why a crosswalk has not been placed there.
Could I address that one first?
Commissioner Hurdain?
So speaking to the question of how it would affect intersection operations, having that crosswalk there, every time you have a pedestrian movement, the amount of green time you have to give to the parallel vehicle movement has to be long enough to allow pedestrians to cross safely. Right now, not having a crosswalk here means that you don't have that problem with the minimum green time for this movement. If there isn't a lot of volume here, you can get through the green really quickly, whereas if you had a pedestrian call, it might take longer. And so not having a pedestrian movement where you don't need one allows the overall intersection to operate with slightly lower delay. It's a trade-off between pedestrian convenience and intersection delay. But that would be the effect, that it could potentially worsen operations for vehicles.
May I respond?
Commissioner Hurdain?
Yeah, my observation over the years has been that the business at that corner is to get around the corner. Most of the people are headed west on Deer Hill, and if time were taken, and the parents know this, if they were to drop their kids at that corner, there's a door opening, there's a kid getting out, goodbye mom and dad, around the car, so on and so on. Then the car can go up the hill, all the traffic is halted, then the next car comes along and we repeat the process, then another car comes. So there's sort of a common understanding that they're not gonna do that. They'll go across or they'll go up or they'll go somewhere else, but they're not gonna drop their kids at that corner. For a very good, and that's really, I think, the reason. It's the absence of delay is what they're after.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm going to bring it back to the Planning Commission, and then we should probably move on out of our question.
Well, so just to touch on that, so if parents, in theory, wouldn't be dropping off at that corner, they're going to go up to the bus pocket. So how many cars can fit in the bus pocket, even though that's a design feature for the project, it's going to be used for the school?
One moment, I have that noted in the chapter 9.
8. So was that considered in the analysis? The backup of school buses, city buses, or county connection, parents?
One moment, I'm trying to find the section where we talk about this loading zone. I think
Page 91.
91?
Yeah.
Yes. Project impacts to passenger loading and on-street parking areas. So the expanded loading area is about 180, 200 feet, which can accommodate quite a number of cars.
So it's, yeah,
up
8
to-
waiting vehicles.
Yeah.
Just I mean, personal experience, I drop off at Stanley along St. Mary's Road every day, and there's way more than 8 vehicles trying to pull in and pull out at the same time, and that's only one lane going in that direction. Just something to think about.
Did you have an observed number of?
Do we have any other questions on the planning commission for
Yeah,
TJKM or staff?
Well, just to clarify, so the trap lane was a mitigation measure, more or less. The trap lane was a mitigation measure in the 2013 final EIR. Then the applicant has now revised their project to make it an actual project component. And the reason the mitigation was included in the 2013 final EIR was to reduce an impact from significant to less than significant
That's my
with
understanding.
mitigation.
That's my understanding.
Okay, so now if having the turn pocket or the trap lane as part of the project is a significant unavoidable impact to the gateway plan, if you were to remove it and just do the project variant, wouldn't you still have the significant impact?
You would. My understanding of the 2013 EIR was that they didn't consider adding the lane to be a feasible mitigation, so the impact at that intersection was significant and unavoidable. And the infeasibility was due to conflict with the La Miranda Action Plan at that time.
Okay, thanks.
But that's why we studied with and without.
Yeah.
Commissioner Heising?
Yeah, just 2 quick questions. First, I'd like to say I really appreciate you responding to this peppering of questions, and I know it's not fun, but with that, I have 2 quick ones. And one is related to what we were just talking about regarding the parking, the offloading zone, and the 19 spots that exist on Hill Road right now. Page 4 in the executive summary, it says that the 19 spots on-street parking are going to be removed for the 8 waiting spots. So those aren't parking, so we're losing 19 parking spots. And this wouldn't even be a concern of mine. If the homes at Deer Hill were built, we'd have a parking lot on the corner that would serve as overflow parking for the school with drop-off for the kids. But that's not being discussed here tonight. But what I take issue with on page 4 is it says this is a less than significant impact. I disagree with that. And then back on page 91, it says here the proposed project would remove the 19 street parking spaces on Pleasant Hill Road and would not replace the lost spaces. However, these spaces are sparsely used. So that's what I disagree with. I think parents drop their kids off there. They drop them off on Deer Hill as well, but I personally have dropped my kids off on Pleasant Hill Road there. And then also it serves a big purpose during school events. That's public parking on a public facility. And so I just disagree that taking away 19 parking spots is not an impact. So I just leave it at that comment. And then my last comment is regarding a comment made earlier on in the presentation, when you first made your presentation, that the signal preemption is a mitigation for the emergency vehicles. And I would disagree with that as well, in that when at peak periods, especially in the PM peak, northbound, and probably AM peak southbound, there's so much gridlock there and everything's at level of service F. If an emergency vehicle sends a preemption signal message to the signal controller and gives them a green, it's not going to flush out all the traffic. There's so much traffic that I don't think that emergency vehicle would be able to get through. Nor do I think there's sufficient shoulder widths so that people could pull over and let that emergency vehicle through. So I'm not quite following how simply preemption technology is going to be a mitigation. That's all.
I agree that the street is jammed up, so it would have minimal influence along the corridor, but near the intersection, the flush action would work. That is, the cars would clear out for the last, not the whole street for sure, but for the last, probably along the school frontage, that distance back would be improved. So that'd be about the limit of it, I would think.
So is the preemption being considered just for that one intersection or the next one down or upstream? Would it, when you institute a flush plan, if you will, a flush plan is different than preemption. Preemption is at each signal as the emergency vehicle approaches. A flush plan is more that you're communicating if you have signal interconnect with all the signals and you can tell all those controllers in the corridor to go green. That's a true flush plan, and you just flush everyone through, and then the EVA would go with it, with all the traffic.
I think that whichever of those would be most effective would be what should be done, and it could be. It's not a big issue from a cost standpoint, I believe, to go back at least another intersection or two. So that would be a good idea.
Okay, thank you.
Also, I'd like to note the emergency vehicle signal preemption was listed as a mitigation measure in the 2013 EIR.
Yeah, I'm not arguing that it won't incrementally help. I'm just arguing that it's not going to solve the entire problem, that maybe there's tweaks to it. Maybe there can be signal interconnect, and it can be one intersection upstream and one intersection downstream, and that could be crafted with a condition of approval. Hopefully there's interconnect wires already there, and I see the city engineer nodding his head, so maybe it's just a matter of programming the controllers.
Yeah, that could definitely be a condition of approval, and working with the city engineer on that would be the way to go.
Okay, thank you.
Madam Chairman, could I interject something here that's pertinent?
Okay, Commissioner Dane?
Well, yeah, Chris was just talking about flushing out a block or two. When Pleasant Hill Road backs up, it backs up all the way past the split onto Taylor. There is no flushing out one block.
Okay.
Somebody's got to understand that, because that is not understood by whoever recommended or thought that the preempting would solve all the problems. That's only a minor drop in the bucket.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Farzan, did you have a question?
No, actually, I have questions about the preemption. I guess my concern is if it doesn't flush it out, the emergency vehicles have no space to go around. So that's the way I see it. You either flush out or they're stuck. There's no side road, there's no emergency lane, it's not the highway, you can't get around with a fire truck.
It's not the
That's my concern.
All right, Commissioner Labange?
So mine's on the same thread, but just slightly different. So I didn't see anything, I'm more concerned with a evacuation situation, fire-related. It's not new, we've all seen this. So, and I did a search on fire, and it does talk about the preemptive, but that's really just to get vehicles. What about, I think similar to how we've now asked Caltrans to address, the backup on the freeway, we should ask the Fire Protection District to weigh in. And the scenario that would scare me the most would be a fire in the morning that's north of this project, because all the jamming up is going southbound. That seems terrifying to me. So they should be asked that specifically and weigh in on that, because we just heard from, and I've never been up there then because I'm scared to death to go up there in that traffic to see how far it actually backs up. But if it truly flushes, if it truly backs up all the way over the hill, it's one thing to flush it for the fire engine that's going somewhere else. It's another thing if all those people are trying to get out. So could that be asked?
Sure, yes.
So by our next meeting, the Fire Protection District, we could get an answer back on that. I think that's, you guys, I hope, have read most of the letters. I think someone else addressed them, a good majority of them, that's a big concern. If I lived up there, that would be my biggest concern, so. That's it for me.
Okay. I have a few questions. Back to people observing a backup onto Highway 24, I actually thought that in the analysis, when you were talking about the queuing capacity, I thought that that would be the result of the queue capacity being exceeded. I didn't see that showing up in the analysis, so why is that not?
For queuing capacity being exceeded, which queue are you specifically referring to?
Well,
Are you referring to the northbound?
I'm
left?
saying, why wouldn't your analysis show the backups on 24? Why would we have to go to Caltrans for that? Like, wouldn't it be that the queue is extending all the way, the queue at that light at the main intersection we're talking about is extending all the way back and then up onto 24?
So currently, the turn pocket ends right about here, and the left turn queue extends past into the through lanes. With the proposed project, it would lengthen the turn lane, and the new turn lane would now actually accommodate all of the left turning vehicles. So it would no longer back up into the through lanes. So we would expect that to actually make the through lanes work better, because we would have more storage space for turning vehicles. I think that addresses what you were asking.
You're saying that that's a mitigation measure for the issue of the
It's not a mitigation measure, it's part of the proposed project is lengthening the turn pocket, and so it improves it compared to existing conditions. Under existing conditions, this queue overflows currently. So you have people queuing up at the intersection, but the storage can't hold all of them, and so they extend into the through lanes
Okay.
and block the through lanes. With the extended turn pocket with the project, you'd no longer have those vehicles sticking out into the through lane and blocking traffic.
Until the 2040 projection? Is that?
I believe 2040 it still fit. I'd have to double check the tables.
But that's for the intersection at Akalani's, not for onto the freeway. Because you're talking about onto the freeway.
So you're referring to cars backing up all the way to the freeway?
Uh-huh.
And on, yeah. So that turn lane helps mitigate impacts at the intersection, right? At the intersection by the school?
Mm-hmm. And on traffic flow through here.
It helps promote through traffic.
Yeah.
Or throughput.
Yeah.
And then keeps the throughput from backing up and exacerbating the backup on Highway 24.
Yeah, we would expect it to help improve conditions going northbound through there.
Okay.
So,
Commissioner Farzan?
So I'm sorry, just for clarification for me. So a left turn lane, is the assumption that people are coming off the highway to take a left on Deer Hill?
Some people do.
Yeah, right, that's some people.
So the assumption for the project, so currently, some people would make that. With the project, people coming off the freeway to enter the project would need to make that left turn.
Right, but current situation is during peak hours, people are still wound up onto the on-ramp on 24, and they're not going to take a left turn to the project. So even current conditions, the backup goes on to 24 during certain peak hours. That's my question. That's what I asked earlier, whether anybody had addressed that. And I still haven't gotten an answer to that.
So we did simulations, but the concern with looking at the backup all the way to Highway 24 onto the main line is that there's no traffic control here. So we did micro simulations that, virtually move cars around based on existing volumes and other traffic parameters. And looking at traffic speeds through here and whether that represents the degree of gridlock. The project doesn't make conditions any worse in terms of how long it takes to get through this area. So we would not expect it to make the backups worse.
Got it.
Okay. Let's see, my second question was, I don't know if you've read the memo from Impact Sciences, but
I did.
at the end of it, they refer to the updated CEQA guidelines or checklist. And under the topic of wildfire, there's a question about whether the project would substantially impair an adopted emergency response plan or evacuation plan. I was wondering if that's something that your report would be looking at. Is that a traffic consultant that evaluates that, or?
We can ask them to look at that with, there's a published evacuation map that the Emergency Preparedness Commission has prepared. And they can look at that as it relates to the project.
Okay, all right, thank you. My third question is related to the driveways, well, I guess the two eastern driveways. If,
And you were referring to the Pleasant Hill and the Deer Hill driveways close to the intersection?
yes.
Okay.
I understand that they were, well, at least the one that was going to Deer Hill was moved further west, and that was preferable, I guess, in terms of proximity to the intersection, and then also sight lines. And there, I know the topography starts to get sort of tricky as you move away from this more level corner. But I was wondering if it's possible to move that driveway further west, would that be helpful to the intersection or to the safety of turns in and out of the driveway?
Based on how far it is from the intersection right now, we don't anticipate any problems with that. We've got, part of the moving the driveway was adding in a storage lane for people to wait to turn into the driveway. And it was moved, I'm not part of the civil team, I think it was moved about as far as it could be.
Without hitting
Yeah.
that steep slope?
Yeah, because the topography is so extreme over here.
Okay.
And in the appendices, there is a line of sight study that shows the profiles for the current driveways, looking at the line of sight from the driveways onto Deer Hill Road.
Okay. I was sort of thinking about the interior vehicular circulation on the site and wondering about some schemes for maybe simplifying a little bit more. And we didn't have all the topography information in our packet, so I wasn't sure what could be done with that. But if somehow down the road it was moved further west and that left turn pocket that's there now was extended, would that, could that serve to move more of the right turn traffic? Like if that left turn pocket becomes longer, can it help alleviate right turns off of Pleasant Hill South, or is that sort of an awkward movement where you're moving into the lane and then moving back over?
You're referring to going southbound and turning right onto Deer Hill, trying to alleviate that?
Yes.
It would not be directly related. So currently, there's one through lane on here. The project would widen it to add a turn lane specifically for people turning into the project. We wouldn't expect it to make a big difference in throughput for there.
Okay. Okay. And then my last question, I guess, is for staff. So we're looking at the potential impacts of the proposed project on existing conditions along Pleasant Hill Road. I think the issue is that the existing conditions are already unacceptable, and I was wondering if we could just touch briefly on what, I know the city, it's an ongoing concern of the city, and I wonder if we could touch briefly on what the city has done recently and any plans moving forward, and any impact that anything that the Law Miranda Action Plan.
So I know Justin sent out an email, but this was just this afternoon in response to his question. But just to summarize it, there is not an ongoing project. There's actually this summer a paving project on Pleasant Hill Road from Mount Diablo Boulevard to Deer Hill Stanley. It's just a resurfacing project. It will try and improve bike flow. You'll see the green bike lanes, but there's no great way to cross freeway on-ramps and off-ramps with bikes and make it super safe. And that is separate from this project. It doesn't mean this project couldn't be incorporated into better bike ped. But the three things were to try and, increase through at Deer Hill Road at Stanley. The difficulty of increasing throughput at Deer Hill Road and Stanley is you have contrary objectives. You have in the morning Stanley traffic, and in the evening Deer Hill traffic, and then in the morning Pleasant Hill Road one direction, southbound and northbound in the evening. And there's no way to just say, I'm going to give you more green time, even though I get that call all the time. Please just adjust the signals. I get the call that the freeway's backed up sometimes. You should fix it. I'd love to fix it, but the problem is you have too many people going contrary directions at the same time, and you all have to take turns. So we have tweaked as much as we can. For example, if you're going southbound on Pleasant Hill Road and you want to make a left onto Stanley and go into the parking lot, because about half of the population at that high school drives themselves there. We've extended that green time slightly. In doing so, you take away time from other directions, including Deer Hill Road, including coming back out if you were dropping your kids off or if you're coming from that neighborhood. And you have freeway traffic trying to get to the freeway in the morning and away from the freeway in the afternoon. There's very little we can do, particularly since the gateway restraint policy doesn't allow another lane. The methods that we want to use are really traffic demand. They're really, carpool to the school. They're really, try and avoid the peak times. Don't go through at 7:45 in the morning if you can go through at a later time or a much earlier time. We haven't done much of that. If there is a future project there that is not associated with the development project, it is probably going to focus more on bicycle and pedestrian routes and multi-use pathways. There's been a proponent that's suggesting put a bike ped lane down the middle of this road so that you, from Mount Diablo Boulevard to Deer Hill Road, so that you're not crossing the on-ramps and the off-ramps, nor would you have this weaving situation at the proposed new development. Yet there are avid bicyclists that say, even if you build that, I still want to cross those, I'm going to ride with the cars. So you kind of have to balance both. But if you've got a ninth grader that you want to, come from downtown Lafayette and ride their bike to school, I'd like to get them there safer. And so none of those projects are planned. They're more likely to happen as part of a new Measure J or a development project. They're not on the books. We could potentially get grants for an adaptive signal timing program and kind of micromanage the 5 traffic signals from Rancho View Drive to Deer Hill Road and improve things slightly. But you kind of have to manage your expectations. You can only improve things slightly if there's really that demand. If there's one hiccup that impacts the 680-24, then there's going to be a lot of people on Pleasant Hill Road. And we see that now, and the technology is such that it will send you there within minutes of it happening, and it just balances out. And you kind of pick your poison. Do I stay on the freeway for 34 minutes, or do I take Pleasant Hill Road for 33? It's just what it is. We don't have a planned city project at this time. There are some smaller adaptive things that we can do, but not a big thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any questions? Okay. So at this time, we're ready to receive a presentation from the applicant.
While Greg's setting that up, I'll just introduce myself. I'm Dave Baker. I'm the project manager for the Terraces at Lafayette. And I want to say good evening to the Planning Commission and Circulation Commission. We started this project in March 2011 when we first submitted, and I think Lynn is the only consistent member during all that time, so she's sort of the historian on this project. Why did we choose this location? We took a look at the property, and where you see all the problems, I guess we saw the opportunities. We saw the confluence of 680-24. We have a major arterial coming in. You're a little more than a mile from BART. If you develop on this property, you don't tear down any existing businesses. You don't drive through anybody's neighborhood. We felt that this is, if you're going to build multifamily in this area, every site's going to have issues. Everybody says build it somewhere else. But this site had so many positives, we said, yes, we should go for it here. And that's what got us started. See if I can work this. And so we came up with this site plan, and it was based on what was there at the site already. And I guess a lot of people don't realize this, but there were several terraces, building pads have you, that were built with permits during the quarry operations. And so we looked at those existing building pads, and we basically laid out the site with one exception. The building pad that's at the street level of Deer Hill, we decided that would be too much of an impediment to views and everything else. So we decided to lower that pad 30 feet, which is, the downside of that is it generates a lot of offwall, but it does preserve the views of Mount Diablo as you go over Deer Hill. Oh, the other reason, the two other reasons why we chose and the site works is it is zoned for APO, and it was for 35 units per acre. This site is about 14 units per acre, less than half. And the utilities are all there. You've got storm drain, power, telephone. We have wheel service from East Bay Mud, Central Sand. Everything's right there. So it just for us as a developer, it cries out that this is a good place to put a project. However, there is a challenge, and what we've been talking about all night is the Deer Hill, Pleasant Hill intersection. And here's a rendering of the existing condition. And I want to point out a couple things. You have a sort of a drop-off area here. It's a slight indentation with some parking spaces. People pull over there, but they're not fully out of the way of cars getting through. So it's a little bit dangerous. I've actually stood there and watched it with people opening doors and cars having to swerve around them. You got kids trying to, go through if it's raining, through the mud here to get to the intersection. You have this road here. You've got no sidewalk nowhere, but yet people are being dropped off. You have a bike lane that just stops here, and it's actually shared with the right turn lane. So if somebody is brave enough to ride that bike lane, they're actually blocking cars turning right. So these are all the challenges we saw, and we go, how can we make this better, along with the other mitigations for the project? So and this is the existing condition, as you're all familiar, that backs up. This is the AM, backs up a long way on Pleasant Hill Road. You can see somebody right there dropping off one of their students. Here, people doing U-turns, trying to drop off students. There's a lot going on in this intersection, so a lot of things for us to think about. So we started with, okay, what's most important? If you look at the La Marinda Action Plan, some of the most important things that they stress is pedestrian safety, bicycles, and de-emphasizing single-passenger cars. Those are the MTSOs. So we took a look at what was going on around our property, and this photo, shows it's like a choreographed dance. The stoplight turns red, all these doors open, and all the students get out, and they walk down Deer Hill in the bike lane, or in case one student will walk through if it's not too muddy, on the shoulder. What we're going to do is, as part of the project, build a proper sidewalk and bike lane so that there's a safe place to walk. And we feel that student safety is very important part of what we do here. Same condition on Pleasant Hill Road. That's where the parking is and the informal drop-off is occurring. There's not much to walk on there, and especially if it's raining, it's uncomfortable. Here's where we do a lot of improvements. We have a 10-foot wide multi-use trail turnout that accommodates at least 8 cars, and buses if they ever start up the bus route again, but currently it's not running. And that 10-foot sidewalk allows students to congregate and wait for cars to come to them, or when they're getting out, they're not trying to step off into a muddy little field. Same problem as we come into the intersection. We're heading south on Pleasant Hill Road. This is what you're looking at, and if you can see here, this is a narrow little right turn lane that's shared with bikes. And heaven help a biker that is actually standing there. Now he's blocking everybody turning right, getting everybody irritated who's trying to get to BART. What we proposed to do was to have a full right turn lane, a separate bike lane so that they can wait there and people can continue to make right turns. We also propose to extend this right turn lane back so that more cars can turn right, get to BART, and get out of the way of traffic on Pleasant Hill Road. So this is an overview of what it would look like with all the improvements in place. And one of the ones that has been a topic tonight is this, see this Highway 24, this is what we call it, this a trap lane. And I look at it in layman's terms. I see an extra lane. Every light signal should let 50% cars get through that intersection. I understand we have a gateway constraint interpretation problem is the way I look at it. In my mind, a gateway constraint should be like they do in Walnut Creek and other cities at the gateway to Lafayette, not in the middle of Lafayette. And you restrain cars there as much as you can. And once you get into Lafayette, get the cars moving. It's not only a more comfortable drive, it makes Lafayette a safer place if you can get cars, out of the intersections. So that's why we proposed it. And it was, just as a clarification, in the original project, we actually proposed it as part of the project, but the city actually took it out because it said it violated the gateway constraint policy. So when we reactivated the application, we said, no, we want to keep this as part of the application, and if you need to amend the gateway or clarify the gateway constraint policy, do that. Or if you just want to say, no, don't build it, then we won't build it. It'll save us a lot of money. But I think it really, really helps this intersection. And I think we actually will end up being a positive impact on the area. Where is everybody coming from that goes through this intersection? We know about all the students. If you do it in the AM, we know about all the students overlapping with the people trying to get to BART, trying to get to work. But the big problem is we have a lot of regional traffic that comes down the road. In fact, some of that regional traffic is people who work in Lafayette. We have 9,400 people working in Lafayette, and these numbers come from the Employment Development Department, so they're not our numbers. Only 700 live in Lafayette. That means 8,700 people are driving in that work here. Where are they coming from? We did an informal survey, mostly coming from places like Pleasant Hill, Martinez, and so forth. How do they get here? Well, when we asked the employers, they said they don't take the bus, they don't take BART, they drive. And how do they drive here? Most of them come down Pleasant Hill Road. So what we're saying to you is these apartments are going to provide housing for people that actually work in Lafayette and take some of that traffic off of Pleasant Hill Road as it gets into Lafayette. I missed a slide, but they basically use Pleasant Hill as a cut through. Let's talk about the project itself. If you live at the Terraces, how are you going to travel? Well, let me back up. This is the three entrances into the project. The one on Pleasant Hill Road is a right in, right out only. There will be a few people. I don't know. We don't know how many. The traffic report doesn't give us any credit for it, but there will be some people that work for Acalanes High School, whether it's teachers or administration, that will live here, and they will simply walk to school. Nobody's going to drive across an intersection. You're going west on 24. You're going to turn right out of the project on Pleasant Hill Road, past where the problem is, and immediately get on the freeway. You're not going to add any traffic to the intersection. You work in town. You're going down Mount Diablo Boulevard, same thing. You turn right out of the project on Pleasant Hill Road. You get to Mount Diablo, and you go down, you're basically out of everybody's way. What about if you're going to BART? Well, we do have the BART shuttle. We hope everybody uses it. I know if I lived here, I don't mind walking a mile, but I know a lot of people don't. But we have now the advent of e-bikes and e-scooters and lots of lockers being added at BART. We hope between all that and the BART shuttle that none of our residents, I'm sure there'll always be a few, will not take up any parking spaces at BART.
That was the 10-minute timer?
That was the 10-minute timer.
Okay, that was the 10-minute timer.
I'm almost done. Can I just wrap up real quick?
Okay,
All right.
sure, thank you.
So just to finish that, if you're commuting into Walnut Creek or 680, it's the same. You turn right, third exit, you get on there, you're out of everybody's way. And that's a sort of summary of all those things. There's the BART shuttle that we have. Questions were asked about the BART shuttle. It's going to be run by the operators of the department, hopefully us. And it is for the residents of there, but we are very open to discussing if the city wants to have an expanded shuttle program, which hits other parts of town. We're very open to those discussions, but right now that's not part of the proposal of the mitigation. And finally, the left, that's the existing condition. You saw that photo before. On the right, that's what it's going to look like when we're done. And I won't bother to recap all those things because I've run out of time, but I just want to say that the traffic report was done very, very conservatively. It's not using the latest edition of ITE has, in our mind, overstated the number of trips by 20%. But I understand why the city was, the engineers were given the direction to be as conservative as possible, and they made every conservative assumption. They have 29% of our trips going through that intersection. I don't think it's going to be 2% will go through that intersection. So they have been extremely conservative in modeling this thing. And with that, I'm here to answer any questions. We have the team from BKF Engineers. They can answer your questions on how the designs were done, why things were located where they were. And during the last bit, we have our legal counsel will be talking about stuff I don't understand, the HAA and legal ramifications.
Thank you. Do we have any questions for the applicant on either commission? Sure. Commissioner Radnich?
Thank you for your presentation, helpful information. 2 questions. First, do you live in Lafayette?
I have lived in Lafayette, and I did intentionally drive all these intersections at the worst time so I could understand the problem.
Okay. Then my second question is, you said during your presentation that the project will provide housing for people who work in Lafayette. So I'm wondering, will the project be conditioned for that?
We
Meaning,
would like-
will it be conditioned that you can only live there if you work in Lafayette?
Unfortunately, we would violate state law if we do something like that, but we are going to try our best to make it available to local employees. We're going to have 63 low-income units, which in California, low income is still a pretty good salary. Hopefully, those are people that work here that don't want to drive down Pleasant Hill Road.
So it's more a project located in Lafayette that people can live in?
Yes, and we can do things to market to the local employers, but you cannot legally restrict it to
Correct.
local people.
Correct. Thanks.
Commissioner Heising?
All right, just a couple of questions. I don't know, maybe your engineer can answer some of these. One of the items discussed in the study was mitigation or truck traffic during construction. And I just have a general question about off-haul. Is there off-haul on this site, or are you balanced, or?
No, there is 300,000 cubic yards of off-haul.
Oh, so you do have some.
Yes, we have a
Just
lot.
a little.
And a lot of that is generated by lowering that upper pad on Deer Hill. We could, as you know, if you want, we could leave that pad right there and have those apartments sitting at street level, but and pretty much eliminate the off-haul. That's trade-offs we make. So.
Okay. And then can you go back to your site plan? Yeah, right there. So I brought up earlier the 19 parking spots
Yes.
along Pleasant Hill Road. And That's great, you have the bus pull-out and the 8 spots up there. But in your analysis, did you consider pushing the sidewalk back and maintaining those parking spots, which could serve dual purpose as drop-off and parking? Is that something you considered? And then also up there on Deer Hill, where you showed the pictures of the kids getting out, walking along, you're gonna build a sidewalk, but also it looked like from the renderings, there was ample room to push into the landscaping a little and have a little pull-out there, both on Deer Hill as well as on expanding the parking on Pleasant Hill Road.
To be honest, we did not look at a pull-out on Deer Hill Road. I suppose we could, as we get into engineering and working with design review, we could certainly entertain those things. The problem with the parking on Pleasant Hill Road is if you have parked cars there, it interferes with merging onto Highway 24 and greatly complicates the traffic. I would highly recommend if the city, has other places it could park. It just seems to me not a good place to park. We're trying to get people onto the freeway there.
It's no different than it is now, I mean, because that far right lane goes onto the on-ramp.
And I understand that, and most of the time when I drive it, there's nobody parked there, but I do understand when you have a swim meet, every available spot in town is filled up, so it's.
Yeah, I mean, I'm bringing it up because the alternative project's not being built, and when the school has an event, I mean, I know that whole area is used for overflow parking, because there's always a problem trying to find parking.
I'm not sure what to say other than
Yeah, no,
we during swim meets, we have a terrible parking problem.
right. Okay, that was all I had for now. Thank you very much.
Madam Chairman?
Commissioner Hadane?
Yeah, there may be, I'm not sure, but there may be a misunderstanding among some of the audience. When you say that there were conservative figures used, as conservative as possible, you mean that there were more figures to be sure you had counted every single blessed one of them, as opposed to shrinking the figures, right?
Yes, that wasn't my direction. That came from staff. We weren't allowed to talk to the traffic engineer, so that was between staff and the engineer.
Yeah.
And when I looked at the report, I noticed that every possible conservative assumption that was used to our detriment, but yes.
I noticed some of that, not all of it, but some. Yeah, thank you.
Commissioner Taylor?
A quick question with respect to the ins and outs on Deer Hill Road. Are both of those intended to be able to go either left or right out of the development?
They are not. This project here, we have a refuge lane, so you can go left out of the project, you can go right in, and you can go right out, but there's no left in. What we were concerned about, because it was a downhill grade,
Right.
that a delivery truck or something like that trying to make this turn against the slope would have a tipping problem. So we decided not to allow that turn. Pleasant Hill Road is right in, right out only.
Okay, but the more eastern one onto Deer Hill, that is the one that,
Correct, and that's
You
where
could
we
go-
added the stacking distance so people wouldn't back up into Deer Hill. And it was part of the reason why we moved the entrance as far as we did, and so there was some discussion about that. That is as far as it goes unless the creek is right there. So if we go any further, we have to jump over the creek and come to this point.
so someone from within the development could go either left or right out of that driveway there.
Yes.
Madam Chairman?
Commissioner Hadane?
Yes. Do you understand what I meant when I said drivers are going to cut through and come out on Pleasant Hill Road to get around the
I
corner?
understand, and just to clarify, there is no HOA. It is an apartment complex operated by an apartment manager. And I could see that if this was, terminally backed up, somebody might want to try and navigate through the parking lot and come out through here or out through here.
It is, though. I'm talking about evenings, not through the day.
I understand.
PM peak.
Anyway, if it is truly a problem, then things would have to be done to discourage people from doing that, whether it's a gate or other traffic calming mechanisms.
Any other questions for the applicant? Commissioner DeGiorgio?
And this, you mentioned how people might want to live here and walk across the street and work in the neighborhood, work up at the schools or whatever. But it brought to mind, there was a list of site plan refinements around pedestrian facilities. This is on page 145 of the addendum. And my understanding of the process is that the details of that are going to be not really available until the final plans of, what the changes to this pedestrian walkways and so forth.
Are we talking the internal ones?
Internal circulation, right?
Yes, the traffic report, when we were working with TJCAM, identified additional internal circulation. So you saw that on the annotated plan, we added all those in for their direction. My feeling is, when this project gets approved and it gets sent over to design review, then they're going to move buildings around, change things around. They always do. So pathways will change.
I see what you're saying.
And then Commissioner Brown?
Can you go to the Pleasant Hill, Deer Hill intersection schematic?
The existing?
The proposed. So does the applicant currently control that northwest corner property to enable the additional bike lane, right turn lane, and second lane going up Deer Hill?
We do have an existing option agreement to acquire the necessary right-of-way. We have a verbal agreement, but it hasn't been signed yet to buy the entire site to give us more flexibility to do more things. But right now, we have just enough right-of-way to do what we're showing, and not an inch more. So it's.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
So at this time, we will open public comment. Staff?
And I just wanted to note that it's a little after 9 o'clock, and considering we started just shortly after 7, a brief recess at some point
Oh, right.
would be welcomed, I'm sure, by some folks in the room, and we'll reconvene. So that can be now, or it could be at a designated time, but I just wanted to put that out there as a...
Sure. Okay. So I wanted to make one statement before we open public comment. Let me make it so that people can process it while we take a 5-minute restroom break. So I wanted to let the public know that this is the first of 5 public meetings within 90 days that's allowed on this project. So whereas historically other commissions would see a project and look at the project in terms of their area of concern and then forward recommendations to the Planning Commission or the council for their consideration and action, we're essentially having to push 2 meetings into 1 meeting tonight. That's why we have a joint meeting happening here. So we have spent the last 2 hours asking questions, but I think it was fairly efficient. But as we move forward, we want to try to still be as efficient and focused as possible, given that we have a lot to accomplish with this meeting. So the Planning Commission and the Transportation and Circulation Commission are here tonight tasked with reviewing the transportation and circulation aspects of the project, and then commenting on the adequacy of the CEQA documentation. So I'd like to, anyone that wants to speak is welcome to speak for 3 minutes. The Planning Commission does not allow ceding time to someone else, like the council does, so everyone will only have 3 minutes. And I think everyone's going to give us their best thoughts, but I just wanted to put out there that any constructive thoughts, suggestions, comments that come from an area of expertise, oftentimes we have, engineers and such, observations, any comment geared towards supporting what we are tasked with here tonight would be much appreciated by all of the commissioners here. And then also if you find that you're wanting to make comments that someone else has already made, if you could just say that you echo their comments rather than reiterating things, that would help us get to the deliberation portion of the meeting earlier than later. And then I will call 3 speakers. I don't think we have I was expecting maybe like 50 speaker slips. I think it's not quite that big, but I'll go ahead and call 3 names at a time, and you can queue up sort of out of the way so that you're ready to walk up to the dais when it's your turn. And then typically after each public speaker, the chair will ask if there's any questions. I won't do that, but if you do have a pressing question, just raise your hand. Okay, that's it.
Kim?
So we'll take a 5-minute recess. It's about 9:15. Thank you.
Sorry?
I think so.
Procedural or about the content?
Right. Just south from the Shell station, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, no, it's fine. I'm just getting up.
Northeast residents are
Yeah.
You can still send all of that stuff in. It doesn't, yeah, this isn't this is the first of 5 meetings, so this is not the end of the comment period.
And if you send it to the city clerk, Joanne, she'll send it to
Then
everybody.
she distributes.
Okay, I've sent it to Joanne.
Okay.
I've asked her to send it to CERC and council and staff. I left it.
That still gets,
I
that,
think if you say council, I think it still comes to.
because we still have to make the recommendation to
To the
council, so
council.
we get
So would you
it all.
guys, so let's make this easy. Let me just show you something. Let me ask you if you
With the extended left turn lane, that's,
I did these conceptualizations online, okay? I've studied this area for 3 years, and pictures are worth 1,000 words. So, for example, we got some signage, some restricted access signage for all the waste traffic to not come on Release Valley Road. And that was through this process that I did. I proposed those restricted access signs through this document right here and documented things like, this is 3.5 miles from Appomattox High School going to high school in the
That's
morning.
Raleigh Valley Road right there?
That's Release Valley Road.
I go there and drop off.
That
never had it that
was
way.
our
we're doing
traffic.
a U-turn here where it would otherwise be a left onto
from
Deer
Appomattox
Hill.
High School in the morning.
Okay.
This is another picture. North of McGraw Lane in the morning, 1.4 miles to Appomattox. This is another picture, 3 miles from Appomattox. At Lees Valley Road at Withers. All these people were cutting through from Pleasant Hill.
I was just on Withers.
I think
Yes.
the chair read that
So we
earlier.
got our
and it's-
restricted access signs,
I
but
encourage you to
It says
all of these
make those
people, and
comments
we
at the
have
public
letters from
to
the
review and make
Contra Costa
recommendations.
County.
That is a very unique
fire
flow
department
aspect.
thing.
Yeah,
This
it's a
is
unique
a really
flow.
problematic
I
area
have
for
not.
the
Yeah,
fire
yes,
department.
now we do public
I would encourage you to add that.
Not an- was
U-turn
not an
though,
okay thing.
I think you'd have a larger radius if
We
the
got them
trap
because first
current.
student
Because
buses
it's 1, 2,
provided us with
3
a
lanes.
document that
Make
said,
it a U-turn.
Yeah, that's
our
kind of
school
how the
buses
process
can't get
goes.
to
So it
school
goes
on
like this,
time.
and everyone does theirs, and
We
then
got
it'll
it
come back,
because
and
the
then
school
there'll be
districts
some.
themselves
And
mentioned several
there's
targets.
a part
I
that's kind of
asked all of
indented that
this
people are using, the
in
parking.
the TKJM report.
There's a part that's indented
I
that
was
say,
promised that by staff.
the lanes.
And I read the entire, I was one of the few citizens to read the entire TJKM,
and none of this exists in the document. All these cars are presumably now on
I
Pleasant
understand
Hill
what
Road.
you're saying.
Speaker slip.
I think there's more. I think there's more
Doing-
room with
I would
the way
say
this
this,
configuration is versus the
you
old
should
one.
definitely,
You should ask that.
are you planning on speaking?
Yeah, I'm
Tonight?
planning
Okay,
on speaking,
I was
and
gonna say,
I've
yeah.
even submitted all of these to Contra Costa CCTA per their request. They wanted me to come in and talk to them and sit down with them to explain our situation further. But this is a conceptualization I have, and this would be looking northbound. The only difference would be, this is the roadway as it is right now, 68. Actually, I think it's 70 to 72. If we could actually get
No, please.
more land for a lane,
What'd she say?
instead of converting during peak, one of the soloist lanes going southbound in the morning to HOV, we could add an HOV and carpool lane. Okay? So if we add an HOV and carpool lane, all the kids that take the school buses can get through in heavy morning traffic. Our school bus commutes have gone from 6 minutes to 30 minutes in the Northeast. They were 40 to 50 minutes until we could at least get through on Release Valley Road now that we have the restricted access signs that are only partially working, by the way. So this would be, that's looking north. If you're standing at the intersection of Deer Hill and Pleasant Hill Road, that's looking north, okay? This picture right here, that would be the way I would do it. I would have a protected two-way bike lane. I would have this bike lane cut through the Christmas tree lot onto Deer Hill and extend going west onto Deer Hill in the morning. So kids with regular bikes could get this. The point is, I need more than 3 minutes. But it's
Issues from it. You addressed only A, because I do see more issues with respect to people going back to it in the PM.
Yeah, trying to head off 24.
Oh, wait, Anna
Whether, like, regardless of whether they're coming from Deer
and
Hill or
Carl.
coming from 24, it just causes more congestion in the afternoon and evening.
Just waiting for, there, Carl. Okay, it's 9:22. We're going to reconvene and start with our public comment. We have Jennifer Paul, followed by Basil Amso and Laura Naiman. Please state your name and address. You have 3 minutes.
Hi. Good evening, Jennifer Paul, 1293 Quant Court. I wanted to first state that in 1992, the City of Lafayette had legal proceedings against the property owner of this site for illegal quarrying. So I'd like to correct the developer that it was not done legally. I'd also like to say that I have video I can show at some point. I've been in traffic on Pleasant Hill Road going southbound when the northbound traffic was so backed up. The fire truck that was coming on the northbound had to come into the southbound lane because they couldn't go. It was extremely frightening for all of us in the car watching it whiz past us. I'd like to say that I'm appalled about the traffic study from 2017 because those of us that live here will be able to tell you. I'm sure that there were outliers in terms of just that it's so shocking there was that much traffic. Not that I wouldn't discount it whatsoever. There is so much traffic. Then I wanted to suggest, I wrote to the City Council and to all of you before, but these meetings should be publicized on an A-frame easel. I think that we should have them at all the important intersections. People are inundated with email, notification, all of that stuff, at least a week before, and whether it's this project or other projects in downtown Lafayette, put up an easel, let people know what's going on. Pleasant Hill does it. I know exactly what's going on in Pleasant Hill at all times. I would respectfully suggest that our communication analyst, rather than taking photos at meetings, that I find very distracting. I would prefer he put up meeting notifications and really let people know what's going on. Thank you.
Thank you. Basil Amso?
Hi, I'm Basil Amso at 12 Gable Lane off of Release Valley Road. We take Pleasant Hill Road, basically Release Valley Road to Pleasant Hill Road every day to go to work. My wife does, and I go twice a day. And every time we hit Pleasant Hill Road, we're in the parking lot. It's stopped. This hasn't been the case forever. We've been there since 2004, and every year the traffic is getting worse and worse and worse. The roads are the same. They're not being widened or whatever. They're always the same. There's no place to widen. Traffic is the same. In fact, traffic is getting more. People from other communities, like the gentleman here said, using the same road. Sometimes I leave home and I get on Release Valley Road and there's traffic there. And there's only a mile from my house to Pleasant Road, and we're stuck in traffic, even on Release Valley Road. This is before anything is done. So adding to that will be another 500 cars from this development that will be going into this intersection. It takes us about half an hour, takes my wife half an hour from our house to the BART station, which is only 3 miles away. You know, with the additional cars and that jamming that intersection, it will take us forever. So I don't know how we're going to resolve this if we're keeping the streets at the same width, number of lanes and whatever. Where are we going to put all this traffic? That's all what I have to say. Thank you.
Laura Naaman?
Hi, so I live at 3234 Delmar Drive, which is north of off of Withers, right where Taylor happens. And so I commute south during peak times. I commute north during peak times. I work in Berkeley, but I also have a business in downtown Lafayette too, so I'm traveling in between those locations. I have 2 kids that go to Spring Hill. It will take us a minimum of 20 to 40 minutes, sometimes longer. If something happens on 680, Pleasant Hill Road is backed up all the way to Taylor. Release gets backed up too. Everything gets backed up. The idea of having 315 apartments in that very, very, very congested and busy intersection is just like unbelievable. And I'm not less concerned coming to this meeting. I'm actually more concerned because of some of the things that were brought up as far as how the data was looked at and presented, and to say that this will not have an impact on traffic and this long commute time is just, to me, is absurd. I don't know how you could kind of presume that and throw out all of this data that showed probably what is the reality of what people experience that drive this commute every single day. And the idea of having my kids go on a bike down this road, I will never let them do that either. So, just the idea of having a bike lane and having that be something that's a bonus, like I would not put my kids on a bike and let them go down that lane with that crazy traffic. And people usually speed down when you can speed. So that's, yeah, and I echo the sentiments of the last 2 people too.
Thank you. Jody McCullough, followed by Melissa Edwards and Thomas Fracey.
I've seen.
Could you state your name and
Oh,
address
yeah,
for the
Jody
record?
McCullough. I live on Solana. Fortunately, well away from where this development would be. I've lived in this town for about 20 years now. I've seen a lot of changes. Most of them not so good. Of all the changes I've seen and all the things I've seen talked about here, this has to be one of the worst ideas I've ever seen.
It's amazing that we're still talking about this thing. I'm just astounded that you know, intelligent people can sit around and talk as if we're going to throw 300 apartments in there and add a couple thousand trips a day, and that's not going to make everything much, much worse than it already is. The current situation is that intersection there is jacked. It is just jacked. I feel so bad for anybody that has to go through that intersection on a regular basis. Add 300 more apartments, it's going to be even more jacked. You don't need engineers to do this. This is just common sense. Just look at it the way it is today. You add 300 apartments, there's no way. There's no way it's going to be better. Let's be realistic here. So, I'm opposed to this whole development. I think most people in town are. I wonder if you put it to a vote. I think probably 80% of the residents would be against it. So I hope that at some point reason will prevail and we will not do this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa Edwards?
Hi. I live off Release Valley Road, and my family would definitely be influenced by this whole project, and I agree with all the other comments that have been said. I wanted to bring up something else. I noticed on the project agenda, it said there would be removal of 92 trees, and I wanted to know at some point, or maybe information could be available as to what those trees are. Don't know if any of those are specimen oaks. Also, I am concerned about the visual impact of this project, and nowhere did I see on the project plans, the study packet, or online any elevations of these 2- and 3-story buildings. And I would think that it would be nice to have that available at some point for us to look at. Thank you.
Thank you. There are site plans available on the website, and in subsequent meetings, we'll be looking at the entire project.
Yeah, hi, my name's Tom. Are we going to reset the clock here? Thank you. My name's Thomas Fraze. I live at 1291 Laurel Lane, which is directly behind Akalani's High School off of Quant. I'm kind of raising a different topic. Martin Stryker, who resides at 1199 Crestmont Drive, had intended to be here. And he did some research into the soils, which I don't know if it's been fully evaluated by this commission. And he wrote a letter, and I'm going to ask that you received the letter, but what he said is this: in 1975, we built our home located 1199 Crestmont Drive in Lafayette. Our bank required us to have a soils report, and then we had to install 90 piers ranging from 6 feet on the uphill side to 20 feet deep on the downhill. Our single-story home is approximately 3,000 square feet. Oh, did I mention we installed French drains and still had 2 landslides that required engineering within the first 5 years. Today, you're contemplating a 315-unit apartment complex on a hillside that is unstable. I looked up a state of California landslide hazard identification map, and here are the excerpts of what it says about that property. Landslide density is greater than elsewhere in the study, with landslides being common to very common. The combination of predominantly gentler and lower relief terrain, abundance of landslides, large landslide size, and the performance of geologic formations exposed in this sub-area indicate that these rock units are generally softer, weaker, less resistant, and less stable than rocks in the surrounding areas, and are inevitably less stable than those in the balance of the study area. Slopes in this sub-area are considered to be naturally unstable and subject to failure, even in the absence of the activities of man. He goes on to state that the proposed apartment development is going to put tremendous amount of pressure on this property, and the Planning Commission should demand that comprehensive studies and engineering be done as part of any development here. Think about it. The developer is incurring a significant risk, and it is inconceivable that his insurance companies and lenders would not require extensive engineering to ensure project stability. This is the biggest single apartment project in Contra Costa County on a hillside. Does everyone really want that risk? The city of Lafayette has significant risk. If it allows this project to be built and it slides, 315 apartment dwellers would have recourse against the city. So would the apartment complex owner. The developer has significant risk, but he will shield himself with an LLC legal structure that related to the project. So,
You could wrap it up.
sure. What he's saying is, to put it in perspective, is that the cost of basically putting this project to an end will probably be far less than what the cost would be to the city in the long run, just to the slide risk. So I'd offer this letter. He also provided the actual map with the comments, and I'd offer that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Kim?
Oh, Commissioner Mason?
Sir, I think that the owner can address that comment in his rebuttal, but I would be surprised if he doesn't also agree that a geotechnical report should be considered for that project.
Thank you. And you gave your letter to staff to distribute? Okay, thank you. Miles McGinn, followed by Kristen Altbaum and Daniel Lilly.
Hi, my name is Miles McGinn. I reside at 480 Peacock. I've been in the city for 36 years now. I've been a homeowner for 34. I'm not going to go over the traffic too much because so many people have touched on that, except for the time of the day that the traffic survey was done was kind of left out, because that's really the important part. I take my wife to work in Pleasant Hill. I come through from Burton Valley through that direction all the time. It's a parking lot, as we all know. Gary, you brought up a point that I thought was great, and I was going to bring it up, is the preemptive part. It's a parking lot, three across, a mile deep. All the technology in the world can change that light to green. It's not going to get an emergency vehicle through, so I agree with you 100%. So, you know, the preemptive thing I don't think is relevant here. The fire is a big concern of mine. I have a friend that lives on Quant Road, and this last fire in the summertime, I helped him evacuate. I happened to be with him having lunch in downtown Lafayette when we saw the planes, so we went over. The tennis club was on fire. And frankly, it brought back memories of the Oakland Hills fire. I had to evacuate my parents from the Oakland Hills fire. Is there anybody in this room that can tell me why so many people died in the Oakland Hills fire?
Please address the commission.
Okay.
Thank
Is there anybody, can anybody tell me why so many people died in the Oakland Hills fire? Just one person.
One way in and one way out.
Yeah, I didn't, yeah,
Well-
exactly. They were trapped. So you add all these apartments, all these people, and you don't have the arteries. I saw that when I went to Quant Road. I helped my friend evacuate, and I saw the gridlock just on Quant Road. So this is an accident waiting to happen. The people died in the Oakland Hills fire because there was too few arteries and high-density housing. So that's all I have to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
I'd just like to add that I know Mr. McGinn personally for 30 years, but we've never discussed the project.
Okay, thank you. Kristen Altbaum?
Hi, my name is Kristen Altbaum, and I am spearheading the public group Northeast Residents for Reduced Traffic on Facebook, specifically because we've had so much traffic occur since 2013. With your permission, I would like to share some photos of that traffic. So this first picture is Ari Lane and Release Valley Road. This is 3.5 miles from Akalani's High School during peak travel in the morning. This is what this is our school bus route. Next slide. So if you would take that up just a notch so we can read the bottoms of them. There you go, perfectly. Okay, Release Valley Road, just north of McGraw Lane, that's 1.4 miles to Akalani's. The bottom right is all these commuters. Most of these commuters cutting through are coming from northeast jurisdictions. We know this because CHP is now writing tickets. We do have some restricted access signs out here that has gotten a lot of this traffic off of Release Valley Road, or I shouldn't say a lot. It's about 60% improvement. Presumably, these people now are staying on 680, or they are taking Pleasant Hill Road. But this gives you an idea of why I started this Facebook group. I think it's unfathomable for anybody in this room to approve, condone, or commit to this project being built without personally experiencing, witnessing, and understanding how many traffic complexities originate at this intersection. It is unconscionable for anybody in this room to not understand the impacts of traffic apps on this intersection and how they promise equal distribution of traffic between 680 and Pleasant Hill Road, making an added right-hand turn lane, a soloist lane, absurd and impractical on the first day it is built. It is negligent for highways 680 and 4 growth projections not to be included in this traffic study. It is immoral for any opinionated person in this room to not bear witness, often to the enormous complexity of school drop-offs and pickups, pedestrian and bicycle impracticality, and the absurdness of how long it takes to enter and exit the Akalani's parking lot.
I'll give you a little extra time for the slides.
Thank you.
So if you could wrap it up soon.
It is unethical not to consider any development within the context of a grand plan for this corridor and to prioritize this grand plan because that is where it is the greatest need in our city. And in the event of emergency, this intersection arguably poses the largest risk to human life. It is uncivilized not to prioritize students' safety, efficiency, and growth projections. They arguably make up the largest number of pedestrians, bicyclists, carpoolers, and public transit users. It is outrageous not to analyze potential construction noise impacts to the concentration levels of Akalani students and the air quality impacts. And it is criminal not to analyze additional fuel load potential and what that might mean to Northeast residents' ability to survive during a massive wildfire. I will end by saying that I have presented some conceptualizations that I think could potentially work for a much smaller and reasonable development at this intersection. I'm amazed that the affected parties are not getting together.
If you could wrap it up.
With the spirit of getting something there that is going to work for all residents' satisfaction.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Daniel Lilly?
Yep, Danielle Lill, I live off Rancho View Drive. I just wanted to give a snapshot of our 5-day-a-week morning situation. I have a young child. I have 10 hours of childcare per day, and I work in the city. It takes me, on average, 30 minutes for my commute to the Lafayette BART station. If I do not leave my house by 7:15 sharp, I often will, more times than not, will not find a parking space, which then causes me to have to circle around, figure something out, maybe drive in. It really creates a complicated process for our morning flow. And the same thing on the way home. I have a very tight schedule where I often sit in gridlock traffic trying to get home to my nanny. So I am 3.1 miles from the Lafayette BART station, and on average, my round trip is 1 hour per day. The other thing I wanted to mention is even if we decided that we wanted to, maybe reduce our carbon footprint and it would be practical for us to walk the 3 miles, there's no sidewalking from Rancho View to the BART station or to Spring Hill Elementary, where ultimately I'll have to drop off my daughter. So there is no other option for us but to drive. The bike lanes don't extend that far, so I feel it's unsafe to do anything but drive at this point, so that is our only option. The other comment I wanted to make was during the recent Lafayette Tennis Club fire, we decided to leave our house. We were not formally evacuated, but we decided to be extra precautious. My husband's a firefighter, and a fire truck was actually, at the time of our exit from Rancho View, was actually blocking off our exit to the left, so we had to go right, and we sat in very extensive gridlock traffic trying to evacuate. It's a very big concern for me with one small kid and for family planning in the future, as kids who are not mobile, who you have to carry. I mean, what do you do? Do you get out of the car? Do you walk? Do you run with these kids? It's a very, very big concern for us. There's no second entry point out of Rancho View, so literally our only option is to flow out onto Pleasant Hill Road. And in this case, there was an emergency vehicle blocking the other way. They were, probably, I think they were staging things at Akalani's, probably got busy. So these are some concerns, and I would just ask that if, something is going to go through, we need to think about how we give more sidewalks, or we need an option to get out or to get to school or to get to work that's not sitting in 1 hour of round trip traffic a day. Thank you.
Thank you. Libby Henry, followed by Matt Reagan and Paul Melman.
Hi. My name's Libby Elizabeth Henry. I'm at 3812 Happy Valley Road, and I've been there since 1958. So I've seen probably more changes in this town than almost anybody in this room. And I was quite impressed with Renee's list of research sources and all of that. And then her summary was basically not giving us any data whatsoever, but we're just supposed to take her word that the 2012 studies are the same as now, or the same as now. And I'm here to tell you, no, it isn't. I don't buy it. I don't think anybody in this room buys it, because we live here and we know what the traffic, just the traffic. And there has been no mention of any other infrastructure problems outside of what the gentleman, thank God, he said something about the soil study. This gentleman said that they consider, that Contra Costa sanitary district's already there. Really? Why would they be there? There's nothing there. So why would they be there? And EB Mud, same thing. None of the power, none of that's being considered. We haven't even gotten to that point. The two exits onto Deer Hill Road, one of them appears to be almost right at the intersection of Deer Hill and Pleasant Hill Road. And I'm like, oh, gee, that's not too congested already. The traffic problems on Deer Hill Road haven't been addressed. I don't have a clear understanding of where that other exit or entrance is. It looks like it's right at the top of that hill, which is really a dangerous place, because it's a kind of a blind spot. If you've ever driven up Deer Hill going east, you can't see. There are just so many ridiculous and unacceptable things about what these studies have shown. We don't know, because we're just being told, oh, well, they're the same as 2012. We need to see the data. You know, I think that the city of Lafayette, the people that live here that have to deal with the problems, it's real easy for a real estate developer that doesn't live here to say, oh, well, the people that now commute to Lafayette will be able to live in those apartments. Really? Well, let's talk about all the developments, the overdevelopment that we already have. And let's see, has anybody looked at the vacancy in those departments, in those apartments? Pardon?
If you could wrap it up,
Okay.
your 3-minute timer.
No, and I agree with somebody else. These public hearings need to be made very clear to the entire population of Lafayette. And we don't anticipate any problems there. That's not good enough. That is not good enough. There needs to be a lot more studies, a lot more, investigating. And we need to know
You could
what
wrap
the
it up.
studies show.
Thank
We
you.
need to know what the studies show in reality.
Good evening, Commissioners. My name's Matt Regan. I'm Senior Vice President of Public Policy at the Bay Area Council. We represent all of the region's largest employers. My specific expertise is in housing and land use. I'm a member of ABAG's Regional Planning Committee and the RENA Methodology Committee, to get really nerdy. I also happen to live at the apex of Martinez, Pleasant Hill, and Lafayette. My daily commute takes me down Pleasant Hill Road and Taylor, more often than not down Release Valley, because Pleasant Hill Road and Taylor is backed up. I look at this problem from a regional perspective. I spend way too many Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday nights in rooms just like this around the region, and every city in the region has the same challenges with traffic, and those challenges are not generated for the most part by local residents. They're generated by the 200,000 people who drive into this region every day from the Central Valley, because that's where we have outsourced our housing production to. 200,000 people a day are driving from Stockton and Manteca and Tracy and all points east into the Bay Area to their jobs. And many of those people are coming to Lafayette, believe it or not, as well, to their jobs. It might sound counterintuitive that building housing on this site will reduce traffic, but it will. And if every other city in the region carries their fair share of the load, it will reduce traffic for all of us. As a couple of people pointed out earlier, whenever there's an accident on 680, everybody gets on their phone on Waze and they're spilling over the shortcut, the cutoff down Taylor and then Release Valley. Those are people who are coming from Brentwood and Oakley and Stockton. They're not local residents. We need to build housing for those folks, our workforce, our kids, our workforce in our region. It's to use the word just recently used, it's unconscionable that we're forcing those workers out of our region to other parts of the state. Now, as a member of ABAG's Regional Planning Committee and more importantly, the RENA Methodology Committee, we're all going to get much bigger RENA numbers in the next cycle. Lafayette's probably going to get 3 or 4 times as many RENA numbers as they've ever had. This is a housing element site that you dedicated for housing. And I would urge you to take a long, hard look at this project and perhaps approve it as quickly as possible, because in a couple of years, it may be upzoned 4 or 5 times to what it's currently zoned, and you may have no authority over what gets put there. It may be a ministerial decision. It may be an SB 35 project. It may be a Housing Accountability Act project. The state is moving in a way to remove discretion from cities who are not meeting their RENA obligations. You need to keep that in mind when you make a decision regarding this project. I would urge you to look at the big picture, to look at not level of service at one intersection, though I do believe that the traffic mitigations for that intersection will improve it regardless of the size of the project. But look at the big picture. House your own workforce and stop the in-commute. That's what's killing us. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Paul Melmid, 35 Prado Way. I've lived here 44 years, and my kids have gone to Spring Hill, to Stanley, to Acalanes. In due respect to the last gentleman, there are always some people in Sacramento who, believe it or not, One of them is State Senator Scott Wiener, who's the chairman of the Senate House Committee. And when we hear his name, we hear housing. But I'm encouraged the Traffic Commission, the Traffic Circulation Commission, and the Planning Commission to look carefully at SB 185 that has been heard by both houses of the state legislature, and will be signed by Governor Newsom probably in early 2020. Senator Wiener, the chairman of the Housing Committee, said that cities where most of the land or all of the land is in a high wildfire risk area, we should not be building there. And SB 182 restricts cities to proceed with the development of low and very low and moderate affordable housing to be built in a very high fire hazard sensitive zone. It also will reduce Lafayette's RHNA requirements, plus other wildfire zoning and general plan impacts. The bill's author is a senator from Santa Barbara. Her name is Hannah Jackson. And she's the chair of the Joint Legislative Committee on Emergency Management. She said, combined with her prior legislation to better manage our forest land and hillsides, I believe that legislation will help save lives and make our communities resilient. In 2013, the city of Lafayette passed and adopted an ordinance 620 that you should all be aware of, I'm sure. And ordinance 620 makes it very clear that our city council, with Don Tatson as the mayor at the time, has declared Lafayette and the Deer Hill, Pleasant Hill Road corridor a very high fire hazard severity zone. It's already been designated in our books before this project was reinstituted. In 2011, this group knew about the fact that our city is in the high fire hazard severity zone, and yet, if you look at the documents before you, they're using a map that the Skinner bill and Mr. O'Brien is using. That is map 51178, when in fact our own city in ordinance 620 is using map 51179. That's the same map that's encouraged in the SB 182 in Sacramento. They're saying to look at the most current maps. The most current maps say that we live in a high hazard zone.
If you could wrap it up.
And the wrap-up that I'd like to offer for you is that the Moraga-Orinda Fire Department, rather new Chief David Whitaker, in June 2019, spoke to a massive group of people from all over the Loma-Orinda area. And he reminds us that there have been 15 major fires that have burned since 1923. 11 of these fires destroyed 3,542 homes. 26 people died, and at a cost of $2 billion. I think that if we approve 7 buildings, 3 stories high and 7 2 stories high in this area, that the city liability exposure for such an approval will be unrecoverable.
Thank you. Okay, the applicant has an opportunity for rebuttal. Right? Oh, okay. Close your eyes. Thank you. Oh, Michael Griffith, followed by Dana Gold.
Hello, my name is Michael Griffiths. I live at 3220 Renino Way. I've lived there 30 years. Only want to make 2 points, just to offer some feedback on the question of RENA. requirements. The city already has other projects further along an approval process that will meet the housing element requirement through 2022. So I would just diffuse that concern that was raised earlier. That's the end of my technical discussion. I just want to make one other point. So the letter here I sent to the mayor and also city council and your commissions, I'll just read it quickly. As I noted in my last letter of January 8th, it is both a violation of the city council action on April 29th, 2019, and also of common sense to allow the developer's hired traffic consultant, TJKM, to review its own Appendix F updated traffic study. A proper independent traffic consultant should have been used and now must be hired. O'Brien Land submitted a proposed addendum December 2018 that included a traffic appendix written by TJKM, retained by O'Brien. The City Council decided in April 9, 2019 to have an independent review conducted of the developer's proposed addendum. Somehow, notwithstanding the text of the City Council action, as my prior letter states, planning staff appears to have decided to have TJKM continue to handle the transportation review of what is effectively its own appendix. No one said the Planning Commission had done anything to, no one said the Planning Commission had anything to do with this decision. As far as we know, this was a planning staff decision. To that end, and constructively, Save Lafayette, of which I'm a co-founder, has hired an independent transportation consulting firm to do a peer review of the new traffic study. It is working as quickly as possible given the volume of the report and limited time available to produce its independent analysis. It will be important that staff and commissioners get a chance to read this report. I therefore request that the meeting be continued and no action be taken January 21st so that the independent report can be fully considered. That was really my point. If you have any questions, happy to handle them. But I think tonight you heard from the audience some questions were raised, valid questions about the current study that was reviewed tonight. So I think a peer review, I'm a salesperson. I always like to go into sales meetings with another helper with me because they catch things that I miss. So I think another review would help the commissions.
Thank you.
Sure, thank you.
Can I ask you a quick question? Sure. What's the timing on this independent review?
We can get it to you within 2 or 3 weeks, I think. We've already got a draft of it, but I didn't want to provide a draft on such an important topic.
Thank you.
Sure.
Dana Gold?
Good evening, all. I live at 1197 Bacon Way, which I believe is one of the areas that, from tonight at least, I didn't hear anybody really talk about the impact of traffic. It's a neighborhood, I don't know if you know where Bacon is, but on that map of the proposed plan, it's in between the Shell and Acalanes High School, behind Acalanes where Springbrook Pool is. It's a one-lane in each direction kind of neighborhood with a lot of families and a lot of young kids, many of which their greatest achievement of the day is getting to bike and walk to school. I don't know how this impacts or how this would impact traffic through that neighborhood as a cut through to Walnut Creek, but I can imagine that with Waze and other traffic apps, it's gotten worse over the last few years. They have rolling speed bumps, what seems like every 100 feet or so, and it's already difficult during busy times. But I think it's something that somebody should probably bring up since there are so many families or single-family residences there. Not to beat a dead horse here, but we talked about this fire that happened this summer and the fact that I think we were all pretty lucky that it happened on a weekend in the middle of the day. I was on a flight on an international trip with other families, and my mother had to evacuate my kids, and another grandmother had to evacuate their kids off of Candlelight Lane, which is a really small private street up Pleasant Hill Road North. And they both came back and said that they felt trapped because they didn't know where they were even going because they're smaller side streets.
Had it been at a different time and they would have had to evacuate to Pleasant Hill Road, there is no way in or no way out. You're stuck. So I just, again, to echo what everybody's saying, it is, to us, it's more than traffic, more than where you're putting a bike lane here. It's significant, it's a real safety issue for a lot of us. Thank you.
Thank you. What was the street that,
So I'm on Bacon, the other one is on Candlelight Lane.
all right, thank you.
No problem.
Lisa Williams?
Hi, Lisa Williams, 1163 Pleasant Hill Circle, Lafayette. I have a picture here that shows Deer Hill Road. Probably can't see it very well, but like we've all discussed tonight, it's back all the way up to downtown Lafayette. So my question is, if you're living in that apartment complex, how will you make a left turn on Deer Hill Road? And then would there be a conflict point coming out of Sienna Ranch, as I've already seen that issue? So for people leaving Sienna Ranch, making a right on Deer Hill Road, and someone's making a left at that area, would there be a conflict point? Also, I don't know if you guys can bring up the site plan, but I live in the Acalanes Avenue neighborhood, and all of us in that neighborhood exit our neighborhood onto Pleasant Hill Road. So we are the ones that make that U-turn all the time to get back onto the freeway or to go towards downtown if we either go left at Deer Hill or we make a U-turn. And my concern is I have a Suburban, I could barely make the U-turn now, and I see every single day that vehicles are getting caught up making that U-turn if they're larger than a Suburban, and there's tons of kids also on that corner bleeding into the street. So I don't know the width of those two lanes right there, but it would have to be wide, so people, if there's buses there, and also a queuing lane to drop off for Acalanes, that is very dangerous. And also when making a U-turn, you would be bleeding into the bike path that's going through the road. That at that point, I guess, would be on the left side of where the buses would be. Another issue I brought up for the shuttle, we already have parking on East Bay Mud easements in the Acalanes Avenue area with kids, being dropped off or picked up from Acalanes. But if people are trying to catch the BART shuttle, I could absolutely see them parking in our neighborhoods. So I don't know what the monitoring would be of making sure residents only are using that shuttle, because they would park in our neighborhood for sure. I mean, that's what I would do. Also, I'd like to understand the liability. We have 4 preschools, a high school, and an elementary school, and every second matters. My kids go to Spring Hill, God forbid there is an issue there. I would want an ambulance to get to them as quickly as possible. I have tons and tons of pictures of even police motorcycles that cannot get through at all. Also, when you're making if you're trying to make a U-turn, they said that they're gonna bring that U-turn or left turn lane on Pleasant Hill Road farther down. And I don't know how I would then get onto Pleasant Hill Road to get to that left lane to make that U-turn, if you bring that back any further. Do you know what I mean? Yeah, okay.
Thank you. Okay, do we have any more speaker slips? Okay. So we'll close public comment now and open it back up to the applicant for their 5-minute rebuttal.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Brian Winter. I'm counsel for O'Brien Land Company at Miller Star Regalia. Given that tonight's meeting is in the nature of a study session for which no action is called for or agendized, I think a rebuttal is not necessarily called for, but there are 2 brief points that I would like to make. The first is an issue that came up a couple of different times, and it's just a reminder that this project exists today because the voters saw it fit to referend the single-family home alternative project that could have been built, and that gave rise to my client's contractual right to resume processing the apartment project. It is a Housing Accountability Act project, which I understand we'll get into in separate meetings. And then in addition, the traffic report that TJKM prepared shows clearly that the project will not create new impacts to the Pleasant Hill Road, Deer Hill Road intersection, and in fact will alleviate existing conditions in the AM southbound peak direction. The slide, I think slide 23 in the slide deck that Dave Baker showed earlier tonight shows all of the different egress options from the project site, none of which would impact that intersection. So those are the 2 points I'd like to make. I'm happy to answer any other questions, but that's the extent of my rebuttal.
Thank you. Commissioner Mason?
Just one quick question. I realize this is just a study session. One of the speakers addressed the hopes that you would retain a geotechnical consultant to address any geotechnical concerns. My understanding that's fairly standard for a project of this nature, but could you comment on that?
Well, it's certainly standard. That will actually be part of the addendum discussion that will follow. It's not on the agenda for tonight, so I think it's probably best for us not to delve into that respectfully, but we will talk about that in detail, I'm sure, at a subsequent meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, we will bring it back to the commission for our discussion and deliberation. I'll give the Transportation and Circulation Commission an opportunity to share any comments. So we are tasked with first looking at the traffic impact study and making any comments on adequacy or details or things that we're looking for in terms of seeing it again with additional information. And then also if we have any specific comments on the changes that are now incorporated into the project shown on the site plan refinements plan.
I'll start. I'm looking at
Commissioner Craig?
Thank you. I'm looking at the Impact Sciences peer review memo, and the last section 3 has a number of recommended revisions to the draft addendum. And there's a lot of concern in the discussion about the traffic counts and using the old numbers and so forth. And the fifth bullet point down says, analyze traffic impact using traffic counts of existing conditions. Is there an intention to update and provide more information based on the Impact Sciences recommendation here, or the, excuse me, the review here?
That recommendation was implemented. The city required new counts to be taken on which this current report is based.
So the report we're looking at incorporates this recommendation?
Correct.
Okay. So is there any way to alleviate the concerns that have been raised regarding using the old data, the methodology concerns?
So the letter, that peer review letter is addressing the traffic study that was done for First Carbon.
Okay.
And based on that comment letter and working directly with the city and with Impact Sciences, we rescoped the traffic study, and the current traffic study that was presented tonight is based on feedback from that letter. Okay. So it's not using old data.
Okay. Now that said, that and I think, you know, nobody wants to see more traffic congestion. However, anything that gets done is probably going to have something degree of more congestion. The impacts
as I'm reading it, look to be pretty minimal with the development coming in. Maybe another 3 to 5 seconds delay, maybe another car length in a left turn queue, that sort of thing.
Yeah, generally. The findings aren't saying that things are good, it's saying that the difference with the project is not very bad.
It's already bad and it's going to get slightly worse.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, but not to a significant level.
And so it would probably be logical to expect that any update, any change in the traffic count and using which year's numbers, you're probably not likely to come to something a whole lot different than an impact of a couple of seconds additional delay or.
And that's what we found with the updated study. The study that I presented tonight is based on 2019 traffic counts, current CCTA model, current policies, and basically all new data that wasn't incorporated into the 2017 or the 2018 study.
Okay. Shifting gears a little bit, the bottom of the section 3 there talks about the wildfire and the wildfire concerns and the need for would the project exacerbate wildfire risks, et cetera. I don't see a lot in the study about wildfire risk. It's obviously a big concern to everybody here. Is there something more forthcoming? Is there anything more we can get to get our arms around that?
Correct, and just to frame the Impact Sciences memo, their memo outlined their findings and conclusions of the developer's addendum, which was submitted in December 2018. So they found that it was deficient and had a number of recommendations, which you've spoken to in the last couple minutes. And so tonight, we're bringing forward solely the traffic impact study, which has been updated based on that memo.
Okay.
In the weeks to come, the addendum will be finished by Impact Sciences, which will include all of the other
stuff besides traffic.
aspects, inclusive of wildfire.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. DeGiorgio?
Thank you. In general, I'm a member of the Northeast area, and so I'm subject to traffic delays on the way to work and the way home, and I'm happy that the phrasing, as my fellow commissioner said, it's incrementally minor amount of traffic impact from this development, but a little bit more traffic is still going to be painful. So that was just giving you my feeling of how I feel about the project. But my question is really for staff. If you might address again, Mr. Griffiths discussed having an independent traffic analysis, and whether, in your opinion, is this really needed, and what might be accomplished by looking at such a study?
Staff does not conclude that additional peer review is necessary. And just to be clear, I think there may have been some confusion, but I wanted to clarify. TJKM was not tasked with reviewing its own prior work. Impact Sciences reviewed the developer's addendum, which included some TJKM work, identified shortcomings, and including what was just mentioned of updating the traffic counts to actual numbers on the ground, which I think most people would find are more reliable than projections. And so based on Impact Sciences' review of First Carbon's entire addendum, we laid out a scope of work to have Impact Sciences fully independently prepare an addendum for the city. Correct that TJKM conducted the initial traffic study for the Terraces of Lafayette, conducted the traffic study for the supplemental EIR in 2014 Following the Homes at Deer Hill action on that, the city council directed a Pleasant Hill Road corridor signal timing study, which the city retained TJKM to do. So with that, our conclusion is that TJKM is a qualified firm to do the subject study, and we don't see the necessity to do a peer review.
All right, thank you.
Commissioner Taylor?
I'd like to circle back for a minute to Deer Hill and the implications with respect to the traffic on Deer Hill. I know a lot has been discussed tonight with respect to Pleasant Hill, and specifically around the PM commuting times that would be contemplated for this development that I think seem to be missing from the presentation that we saw earlier, and neglected to address the fact that the typical route in the afternoon or PM commute would have residents of the development turning left onto Deer Hill to gain access into the development, as well as travelers coming from locally on Deer Hill, adding to the traffic on Deer Hill as it is. And per page 39 in your report, it was already indicating that the traffic on Deer Hill at Brown Avenue was at unacceptable levels during peak hours. And there was a recommendation with respect to mitigation for that a light would be able to solve the problem there. And it's a huge volume problem there in that there's just the one lane that goes from west to east, and it gets backed up, starting at 3 o'clock in the afternoon or before, it just a steady stream of cars. Is that in the plan in terms of budgeting for the traffic light at that intersection? And is that light in and of itself truly enough to mitigate added volume being added to that stream of traffic?
So the mitigation measure signalizing that intersection, it completely removes the impact as far as vehicle delay. I believe city staff is considering having a roundabout instead of a signal. In terms of how much would be budgeted, that would be part of the conditions of approval for how much the developer would be required to pay for that. But signalizing that intersection is one of the mitigations that's listed in the report.
Thank you.
Commissioner Craig?
Thank you. For Mike over there, Mike Moran, the mitigation for the right turn lane to get the adjustment to the La Miranda action plan. Most likely to happen, a stretch. What do you?
I can't really speak to, statistically, what are the odds this will happen. We've had conversations with LPMC, with CCTA, and even SWAT, so they know that this could come their way. But you're talking about electeds from other jurisdictions showing their support or not. So I can't speak to it.
So no idea if they would have a reason to object? Or
We haven't been through that process.
Okay.
So
Okay.
I can only speak really for Lafayette and how we interpret that.
And just to clarify, the concern was raised that that's actually going to make the intersection more attractive and more attractive and generate more traffic. But earlier conversation, the metering is upstream. That's not the choke point.
So that is correct. I mean, ironically, that trap lane could slightly improve the flow through the entire Pleasant Hill Road corridor. You could certainly mitigate that. And I mean, I've heard a lot of conversations about how much time it takes to drive that corridor. That's been my commute route for 22 years. I'm exactly familiar with it. And I know it's 22 minutes from between Green Hills and Taylor to the Deer Hill Road signal, 22 minutes on the bad days. Sometimes it's 17 minutes. Does it feel like 70? It absolutely does. But that's a long time to go a short distance. If that were all of a sudden, that 22 minutes on those bad days were already, if now it could make it an 18, you may just invite some more freeway traffic to fill it up, and gradually it'll be 19, 20, 21, and back up to 22
But again,
minutes.
you could meter that upstream with the.
However you
stoplight.
can meter that, and it's not just a matter of one intersection. There is certainly the first intersection, and that is metering. I mean, if you drove it, you would know, and if you live on Rancho View Drive, you're like, why do I have a green light when there's no cross traffic, that kind of thing. But there's also metering downstream. There's 4 or 5 more intersections where you do want to get cross traffic in. So in the future, I think we could do better tying those signals together. Yes, there are interconnects that can work together, but they don't have the logic that you can have now if you have like a fiber system and the guy in the room literally micromanaging the signals in the morning to either increase flow or deliberately
I mean, if this
meter
project
it.
wasn't happening at all, would you maybe want to do that right turn lane anyways?
It has
funding
been
aside.
suggested for years that we extend the right turn lane onto Deer Hill Road. But I think people are understanding that if you do that and we just improve that, it may be better for us on the short time, but we'd still have to have the metering regionally. And I appreciate the regional discussion because it is. It's, as I mentioned, it's my commute route to work, but I don't live in Lafayette, so I'm part of your problem.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One question
Sure.
for
Commissioner
Mike.
Brown? Oh,
Mike,
question for Mike?
Are there any other effects tied to if the intersection of Brown and Deer Hill were signalized? Any other effects associated with that, or?
Well, yeah, I would have a long-term maintenance issue for as long as that signal's there. And if a truck drives into it and knocks down a traffic signal, I might have a $15,000 problem to deal with. So there are effects. I mean, there's long-term effects. There's the short-term effects. It would improve conditions for people coming on and off of Brown and onto Deer Hill Road. It would improve the safety of those traffic movements immediately. So there is a benefit there as well as meter, throughout Deer Hill Road. So it would function to meter. It would also function as a safety improvement. And if you've ever driven through Brown Avenue, and a lot of people are doing that now as a shortcut because Deer Hill is backed up almost to the BART station, and certainly to First at times of the day. And there was discussion that, a previous project looked at a roundabout there, sort of for the same ideas. It's not the best ideal location for a roundabout because of some topographical issues, but you could fit one in there. But a signal would function well there. Might even be we'll probably be considering a signal there with or without the development at some time in the future.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Mike? Thank you. Any other comments you want to share? Okay. I will bring it back to the Planning Commission.
I'll go.
Commissioner Heising?
Yes, thank you. I just want to thank all the speakers, first of all, for speaking, and just let you know that we do listen to you. We take notes, and I wanted to just ask a question of staff, which I think I know the answer, but we're focused on traffic tonight, but there were things like tree removal brought up, soil, which caused me to write down GAD, Geologic Hazard Abatement District, with a question mark. There were site distance questions, intersections questions, lane width, turning movements, all those things, and I'm looking to staff to confirm this. This will all be, all those types of things will be addressed later when we get into preparing sets of plans and staff evaluating the plans, correct?
So the project proponent has developed plans. They've been submitted in part since 2011. They have revised them in part because of public comment and prior review, which resulted in some modifications, which they spoke to and identified tonight.
But all the site,
with
like site
respect to
distance on the crest of a hill, all that kind of stuff's already been looked at.
For site distance analysis, with the positioning of the Deer Hill Deer Hill Road driveways, the site distance analysis showing the plan view, so the roadway curve and where the driveway is, and the profile view showing the ground level between an approaching vehicle and a car at the driveway. The site distance analysis is included in the traffic study as Appendix H.
Okay.
And it's also addressed in Chapter 9.
Okay. All right. That was my only question. The rest, as part of the discussion, my comments are what I'd like to see we look at moving forward as this project progresses is a couple of things I already brought up regarding emergency vehicle access, looking at how we can improve that with preemptive signals, signal interconnect, flush plans, and then the city engineer brought up adaptive signal timing. I don't know if that's something that can be looked at. And then regarding the La Miranda Action Plan, I think it behooves us who live here and commute through that area and to continue discussions with CCTA to try to get that La Miranda Action Plan amended, because I think the project as proposed with the trap lane is much better than than not having the lane there, the project variant. And then also I would like to see maximized parking and waiting zones on both Pleasant Hill Road and Deer Hill. And I know we talked about the 19 spots and then the 8 waiting spots, and then also the ability to maybe add some on Deer Hill. So those are my comments at this time.
Commissioner Mason?
I also would like to thank all the speakers, especially appreciate you keeping it concise. Several of the comments related to getting the notice out more in the future. I'd also like to remind you that, reach out to your neighbors and things like that. The more information we have, the better off we all are. So see if, anybody, talk to them, constructive ideas, constructive criticisms, hearing the same, we know traffic's bad. I've lived in this town 53 years or something like that. It's always been bad. And it's not going to get significantly better. But once we accept that, let's see what else we can do to make things, help make this, the future of Lafayette a little bit better for everybody. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Lavange?
Yes. I just want to, I've already said these, but I want to make sure we have them. So we're going to have the Caltrans backup reviewed, or they're going to be addressed. The fire danger, we did talk about that, and I asked that, and then when it came up later, it was in impact science as one of the things they recommended. So now I understand that just we haven't gotten that yet, so we will get that. I did appreciate the comment that the ABAG person did. Just it was a different perspective on just us looking more globally. I do think there is something here of value to that. I just wish we could move this somewhere that wasn't so dramatically impacted by fire, safety, and traffic. In my mind, if that wasn't the issue, I would have already been done by now. But that it is the issue. So for me, my biggest concern is just the fire safety. So I'm hoping that will be put to rest very succinctly with some additional information. That's all I have.
Commissioner Badnich?
No, my only is to echo Commissioner Heising's 3 items: EVA, the Long Run Action Plan, and maximize parking, loading in Pleasant Hill Road, and then the Caltrans backup.
Okay. Commissioner Farsan?
I won't repeat what everybody has said. I think the trap lane would be good, but I also think people are probably putting their hopes in too much on something that requires many other organizations to approve it. So I looked at the report with and without. I think it'd be better, but honestly, I don't think you should count on it getting done. I think we should move toward it, but I'm not counting on it. So that's one. Safety, fire safety, both the biggest issues for me if I live there. Traffic's horrible. No one's going to disagree with that. I actually do think it's going to be worse, not incrementally. I personally think it's going to be worse than incrementally worse with the project. But again, my issue is make sure fire safety and safety generally for kids, people who walk, people who ride bikes, those are my bigger issues.
Okay. I concur with what others have said. I think we've done a pretty thorough review, and I've heard consensus on the areas that we are requesting more information or looking forward to receiving more information. I think that the refinements that have now been included in the project all seem reasonable, with maybe some tweaking as we get further along into the design. I do agree with Commissioner DeGiorgio that we're looking at incremental worsening of traffic, and that's defined in the CEQA documents, but the situation is already unacceptable as it is, and I'm thinking maybe sort of a different track from the processing of this project. We make sure that we know what's going on with Pleasant Hill Road, and I don't know if there was I thought there was a special, like a subcommittee that the council was looking at traffic issues. I don't know, we can talk about that later, but I guess I'd like to see, I want the community to know that we're doing all that we can to address existing conditions while we're processing this project as well. So I guess question for staff, do you feel like you've gotten the input that you need from us? Do you have any questions for us? Do we need to clarify anything?
I think your comments and direction, request for additional information has been clear.
Okay. Okay.
So I neglected in my introduction,
Oh.
We had stipulated or recommended in the staff report a continuance. I don't know that we indicated a date, but we would recommend a continuance date of March 16th.
Okay.
So do you need a motion for that?
Please.
To a date specific?
To March 16th,
Yeah.
if that suits the commission.
Yep.
Do I have a motion?
I'll make the motion. We continue this item to March 16th.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? The motion carries unanimously. The March 16th meeting will be a planning commission meeting only.
We'll leave that up to the planning commission to, if you would like to invite the circulation commission, Transcirc rather, to participate again, we could certainly extend that invitation. If you feel that the comments you received tonight are sufficient, then it could just be a planning commission meeting.
Okay. Do we need to decide now, I guess?
Perhaps we could engage the
Sure.
chair offline.
I think that you should let it unfold and see if you need a full body to provide input. I think that we've pretty well explored the issues today. I mean, we're all concerned about fire dangers and other things, but in terms of providing additional recommendations and input, we can also do that through, normal input channels.
Okay, then I think unless you have a strong desire to be present again, then I think we would request that the Traffic and Circulation Commission review the materials for our next meeting and submit written comments to staff to be forwarded to us, specifically on any additional information that we have regarding traffic and circulation.
That's fine.
And emergency access. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, good meeting. So I will close item 7A. Thank you all for coming and speaking and listening. And do we have I guess we're not doing?
No, not for this.
Okay, all right, then meeting adjourned.
Good job, Kim. Boy, yeah, I was off.
I know, it was.
Yeah.
Good job.
When's our next one? 2 weeks?
You got me confused. Did I miss something?
Didn't get, I remember at the end of last year, they were like, here's the proposed calendar, and then we're like, yeah, it pretty much works, and then I never saw like a formal, like, yes, this is the calendar that we codified, and
Evaluate all the
so, if there's a copy of it somewhere,
I guess I'd be curious to see what comes in on that.
It may have been in that packet on the, nice to meet you.
thank you.
In that, the meeting
It's
When
not
I
my
missed
lure.
at the beginning of January,
Try to look up
been there.
maybe that was
the
it.
finances
I'll go
of,
through, because
you know,
they mailed me
as their
something at home,
charity
and that
or
was,
whatever,
I was
but
still in Hawaii for that meeting, so.
seems like a better
most,
place.
most of those kinds of filings are a pretty broad range. You don't have like, you have less than
So, yeah,
It's got to
I'll
be
look through
tens
that
of
and
thousands
see
of
it.
dollars for a study like that.
I don't know.
I can find it.
How do you really know it's independent? Given who's hiring it. I mean, I'm hoping they turn up some good information.
Yeah,
you know?
be curious.
Yeah.
It's just, I mean, nobody
I mean,
brings
like
it up.
the planning commission saying, we
Like, there's
look
no
at
more room
additional
for
information.
additional links. It was like, well, are we gonna like exercise eminent domain here, or, it's like,
But yeah, that was my question, is like, can you guys do this? I mean, it's a pretty picture, but.
I know. Where are you coming up with this space?
So, let's see. Oh, yeah, please, thanks. Yeah, February 3rd, 2 weeks, or
February 3rd.
13 days, yeah.
Okay. I'll put that in there, so I have that one at least.
Thanks, Dick, appreciate it.
Because like Deer Hill, you do have just that one lane, and it does get backed up all the way to First Street. And it's thankfully I don't do that route every day, like west to east, but I often, like my kids do day camps. I live, if you go straight up First Street, it becomes Sierra Vista, and then I'm in a cul-de-sac up that way. So I'm gonna have to recuse myself when we discuss Brown and Deer Hill intersection in greater detail, because that's one of the two access points in and out of my neighborhood. So,
Do you really? Well,
so it's just always an issue, like that Deer Hill gets so backed up, and my kids,
yeah, I would say, do you have to recuse yourself on that?
well, my husband's like, I'd love to have a light there, because I'm always trying to go from, because where we are, I guess it's called Miller north of Deer Hill, it's called Brown south of Deer Hill, and we're always trying to go across, and so my husband's like, I'd love to have a light there. But it's so frustrating. So Sienna Ranch, which one person mentioned. I am oftentimes, in the summertime particularly, my kids will do day camp down at Sienna Ranch. And so then I'm trying to leave Sienna Ranch, and I'm trying to just turn right to get on Deer Hill to go home. And I'm stuck, and there's only one lane for in and out of Sienna Ranch, and I'm behind somebody who's waiting to turn left. And
Right.
Deer Hill gets so backed up that there's like no opportunity for that person to get left out of Sienna Ranch onto Deer Hill. Right. So I just want to, and I mean, part of it, maybe I need to talk to Sienna Ranch people and say like, have 2 lanes going out of here. But it's the people that have even a bigger headache trying to go left to get onto Deer Hill out of Sienna Ranch, because there's no opportunity. It's just volume, volume, volume.
Well,
and
go
you
right
have to
and go
take
to
it
Brown
upon
and
like
go the long
the
way around.
kindness. Well, if you're in Sienna Ranch, then you're just stuck. But,
Or turn
but yeah,
right and
you
do
just
it.
have to like hope somebody's like friendly and lets you into the traffic, because that's the
There's
only
so many of
way.
those around
I
here.
know.
I mean, it's up for, go
I
up
know.
Moraga Road here. and
I know. So many of them are just, yeah, it's just,
Too many
you gotta
people.
wait for somebody who will let you in, because there's no other opportunity.
Too many people.
All right, so you were saying February 3rd is our next one.
Yeah, that's what it seems like. Although, who knows if they'll postpone it or other things will, this will take precedent or what.
All right.
Good one.
You too.
Nice to meet you. Thank you.
Likewise.
Oh yeah, this is probably the first of. Yeah, yeah. So you go.